Recording in progress.
Welcome everyone to our City Council study session for April 15th. Pleased to have you all here with us. We are having our first look at our budget and factors influencing our budget today. So I will turn it over to City Administrator Zelms to kick us off.
All right, thank you, Council President, Council members, Mayor Norton, members of the public. We are at the very inception of the supplemental budget process. So what you're going to see today is very high level. One thing that I can assure you is that the next time you see this in August, the numbers will be slightly different. We haven't gone through our entire process yet, but this is really to get you thinking about the budget, where it's sitting based on what we projected in 2024 for 2025. Some different factors that we're thinking about that may make some changes to the budget by the time we come with the formal budget to you in August, and to get any feedback from you if you think there's things that are missing that you're concerned about, policy items, et cetera. So really be thinking about whether or not the supplemental budget and the levy, granted, this is from the 24-25 approval, is within your priorities, recognizing no one ever really wants to increase a levy, but that's a significant source of revenue that we rely on for a lot of our 24/7 services. And then again, as I mentioned, if there's any specific things that you want us to continue to look at, please, this is a great opportunity for us to be thinking about that as we build out the remainder of the supplemental requests. Pressing forward, and there we go. So again, just kind of reminding you that we do look at the strategic priorities when we are making the budget. So again, we have a focus on being able to support private development of affordable and owner-occupied housing. So we'll be making sure that we have in the supplemental budget some of the sales tax items. Obviously, that wasn't approved when we were finalizing the 2024-2025 budget. So those are some specific changes that you'll see with the economic vitality and the other three pieces of the sales tax. Looking at continuing to invest in public realm and resident experience, making sure we have that economic vibrancy in mind. And then on the RPU side of things, which you won't see much of today, looking at that transition plan for power and all that's going to need to happen between now and 2030 in order to meet that the power needs for being more sustainable. So again, as I mentioned, we're at the very beginning. We are continuing today as actually the due date for supplemental requests, and those are more smaller requests. We do the bigger process in the 2024 year, in the first year of the 2-year budget. You will be reviewing the audit here. So what actually happened in 2023 come June timeframe. So you'll have a sense of where things shook out for the 2023 year. And then again, in August is when we come back for more of that detail. Again, it's high level, but the detail in the budget and what may have needed to change. And then of course, every year, September is your preliminary levy. You technically have the second meeting available, but we like to have room to make sure we certify that to the state. Your preliminary levy is the highest levy you can have. It can stay the same or go down thereafter. And then the budget hearing we would be planning to have on December 2nd. So just a reminder, one more time, we don't have decision packages really this year, although those are included here for clarity on what was requested and what was recommended. And then we don't really do baseline requests. We project a change to the baseline, and then we finalize that as we go through the supplemental budget. And we just do minor changes to the CIP for anything for the 2025 year. So where are we sitting today? This is from what was approved in the 2024-2025 budget. So we are still sitting, this is without Silver Lake Pool, at 110,209,000 in tax levy that would be necessary. That would be a year-over-year increase of 8.5%. That is not the tax rate change. That is just the math of what was collected the prior year and the difference for what would be necessary in the next year. And then that would have the general fund sitting at about $122 million. Again, that could change, but generally we try to stay within what was projected for the levy. We do plan to come forward in November with action plan data so that you have a sense of how we're progressing on all of that detail that supports your strategic priorities. And of course, as I mentioned, the audit for what actually happened in 2023 will come forward in June. So this is kind of the pie chart of how that 122 approximate $1 million shakes out in the general fund. And a significant portion of that are often 24/7 services. So between our public safety, which is fire, police, and flood control, as well as building safety, and then the public works, you can see it's a significant chunk of the funding for the $110 million property tax is necessary in order to provide those services. We don't charge you when we come out with the big red truck or the squads. We provide service when folks call 911 and it's an emergency. Then we have general government and some other. So other could be all kinds of different things, including things like civic music or public music, et cetera. Um, Another way of looking at this is that there is a significant amount of tax levy that's necessary in order to support police, fire, public works, the municipal recreation system, and the library. So when you look at police, you're looking at about $37 million in the 2025 budget. That's significant. And when you think about, there is some revenue that comes in, but it's not a significant amount of revenue relative to the funding source that we do rely most on, which is the property tax. Similarly for fire and for public works. And so just a reminder of when we talk about the levy and how maybe concerning it is for it to be at a certain level, the lion's share of that is going to services that would be challenging to reduce, have some significant implications. And I'm going to break this up a little bit and invite Mr. Parrish up to talk about economic indicators so that I don't lull anyone to sleep with my budget voice.
All right, Mayor,
you.
President, members of council, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just going to go through some of our fiscal and economic information and then pitch it back to Allison to kind of go through some of the factors that are influencing the budget, things we might not have known about prior to this. First, I want to take just an opportunity to introduce we'll call it our budget brain trust, but our budget team is also here this evening. So we got Brian Anderson, maybe raise your hand here, our finance director. Rachel, she's our assistant finance director, and has really done a lot of work on our budget, and she's transitioning a lot of that work to our new budget manager, Pat Moga, who has been here with us for 1 month or 2 months or so, and is really getting onboarded into the process now. And so really appreciate all the work that the finance team does to support the budget process. Even in a supplemental year, there's definitely work and things to be done, although we do hope that it is a little less than our more intensive 2-year effort. So good thing for Rochester, we are very encouraged by the fact that we have a very low unemployment. So it's ticked up just a little bit in 23. But if you really think about unemployment being at 2.5% plus or minus, realistically, that's almost considered full employment. So we're doing well in that category, a very robust job market, and that's been the case in Rochester historically. So we have very positive information there. In 2023, going into building permit valuation data, we were a little bit down in 23, down 6%, but up historically. So if you think about since 21, coming out of the pandemic, we've been at over $500 million of valuation in our community, which is a very high level. If you compare us to other communities in the state, and if you look at 20 and 19, of course we were below that, but generally above $500 million in all those years, and we're doing quite well this year. We are actually at 40% of what we're projecting, and we're just first quarter this year right now. And so, as we've talked about with some of the bold forward unbound and supporting transformation work, we are starting to see that, and we're very encouraged with what we're seeing there. Also in the net lodging tax. So lodging tax is something we collect. A lot of that supports our, destination marketing, as well as a civic center and other things, and some of our civic center related debt. As you can see, though, a fairly substantial low point in the pandemic in the lodging space, as you would have expected. But we're right around pre-pandemic levels now in 23, and so we're extremely encouraged by that. Occupancy room rate, is starting to stabilize. And as we go into 24, I think there's nothing to say that that's going to look any different for us. And so we're encouraged by the rebound on lodging tax. And I think our partnership with the Civic Center in particular is important in this space. And, we're now at a point where we have the opportunity to rethink about reinvesting in capital now that we've kind of hit some of those have gone away from some of those low points on the lodging tax. Likewise, sales tax was not particularly pandemic impacted, and much further ahead of schedule than what we projecting. So we've seen real good growth in sales tax, which is good news for us. However, that also means there's probably been some impact with inflation out in the community that would drive these numbers as well. But there's some real growth in there. And we're excited about that. In fact, just as a reference point, when we were doing a lot of our sales tax projections for the 2023 sales tax that we had out there, we were really projecting off of 12 or so million. And so you can see now we're getting to the point where we're almost 16 million. So while we have a very long horizon for that tax up to 21 years, we would expect with this and then future inflation that we would be able to accumulate the $205 million in funds much faster than what we would have originally anticipated. Still quite a number of years out, but not 21 by any stretch of the imagination. So probably think 15 plus or minus in that space. Valuation data, of course, is important. We want to understand all of our property taxes based on, the valuation in the community. We have different classes: commercial, industrial, agricultural, residential, multifamily residential, et cetera. And we like to understand what is growing in the community. That can cause shifts. If commercial's, growing slower than residential, some of the property tax burden can shift to residential. So it's always good to understand that. And this year, the numbers are moderated somewhat. So less growth in we'll call it our existing valuation at 2.4%. So that's moderated some. And then new construction also a little bit less than what we've historically seen, but still overall growth in the community of 4.33%. We'll get better information as we get closer to the fall and start to understand the average value home and so on. So just an important thing for us to think about. Also, our friends at the Rochester Southeast Minnesota Realtors and Jim Miner provide us great data on what's going on in our housing market. So we always appreciate that. If you look at homes sold in 23, that was really the first year we had a little bit of a dip. Probably seeing the impact of some of those higher mortgage interest rates in that scenario. But in 24, first quarter up to this point of the year, we're kind of moving back up, which is what you are hearing nationally, is that housing prices will probably continue to migrate upward. However, just bear in mind that last piece of the bar chart on average price sold really is, average price sold really is just one quarter's worth of performance. You see more of your inventory moving in the summer. So we like to look at it in full years, which for last year was a bit of a 4% dip on both average. And then you can look at it the same way, about a 5% dip on the median. So just realize a little bit of relief there, but you also look at it historically just on this median slide, and in the 10-year difference, the housing price is still probably doubled, a little bit more than that. So just bear in mind housing as one of your key priorities is still a factor. We do a long-range financial management plan. This is your forecasted levy based on the budget you adopted last year, and then how the finance team rolled those expenses forward into outer years. As you can see, going into this year, we were planning on an 8.55% levy increase in 25. That's in the budget you adopted last December. We now have the Silver Lake pool, 0.5% levy increase sort of reflected here, and that will, change that moving forward. And then there's going to be many other things that Allison's going to talk to you about that might have an impact on that number. But our starting point to sustain the original operations really is that 8.55%, and then anything else like the pool and other things will be discussed and considered. And then lastly, as you can see, we are weaning off of the holistic budget stability funding that we use to buy down the levy in the ARPA years. So in fact, from 24 to 25, we're reducing reliance on that by about half. So you can see we'll be down to 713,000, and then 27 is the last year that we have a program for that funding and really getting us back to kind of our normal baseline that supported the limited budget increases we did in the pandemic, as well as not necessarily moderating all of our spending. So with that, I want to flip it back to Allison to talk about some of our impacts that you'll be thinking about as we move forward.
Thank you, Aaron. And I guess we should also recognize Nolan Shield, although he's here for parking, he was also helpful in transitioning some of the CIP. So thank you to him. We never let him out of the budget. Sorry, Nolan. So I did, unless there's questions so far, want to kind of go into some of the additional impacts that are more budget and less maybe sort of economic projection. So we've been planning for a fair amount of debt service that is projected within the budget. And so you saw the budget go up a little bit more in 2026, and that's in part related to the debt capacity and bringing that on. But that has been in order to be able to build out some of the downtown building transition, although we do have a fair amount of federal funding with the IRA funds going towards that. There still was a little bit that would need to go out for financing, as well as the city's portion of the park maintenance facility in excess. So it's basically the match beyond what the state bonding was. So those are things that are making changes in the future, but will help to really have a better optimized system going forward. The 2025 budget also projects a flat budget for the outside agencies, and that is historically, typically, we haven't seen significant increases there. That's really intended to be supportive of other revenues that those entities generate in order to operate as non-governmental entities, either in a city building or as a service that otherwise we might provide through some sort of contract.
Ms. Elms, can you just clarify for the debt service? So while it might be tweaked slightly, it is already estimated in the.
It's estimated in the budget. So things that might change are if interest rates continue to go down a little bit, that could be better. We will want to really make sure our pricing window is as optimal as possible, recognizing that we want to still carry it here. So when we actually make those payments could be slightly different depending on when we actually go to the bond market.
But we're not expecting a major change.
We're not expecting a major change, but if interest rates went double, we would,
Sure.
that's not what's projected here. So those are just things that could be impacted. And then we obviously have to project in the bold forward unbound and those positions that we talked about, but there is a revenue source associated with that. So you'll see a revenue source as well as the positions. The positions will be within the department where they're providing the service from. So they have the support of others, but they'll be coded to a specific code that's related to the construction permit revenue and be doing things that qualify for construction permit revenue. But again, that's different than what you approved in 2024, right? So that will be a change. Bargaining, we do have, we are fortunate in Rochester to have 20 bargaining units. So we have 11 bargaining agreements that are open that need to be negotiated, including police. So we're starting to work on those. We do have some adjustment projected here, but obviously market conditions and things have changed significantly for some different units. So we do plan to have a closed session on May 9th to talk through what we're anticipating and get some feedback from the city council on that. So those are things that we don't fully determine, and a number of those 11 bargaining units are interest arbitration units. So where if there's not agreement, it goes to arbitration and a arbitrator decides for us what that final determination will be. Silver Lake Pool and bathhouse replacement, a bright spot of the budget. And so we will be moving forward to adjust that in order to follow the direction that the city council approved. You did a budget amendment that will also need to carry through then to your approvals in September and December related to the financing strategy. And then air service needs, you have a study session coming up in May to talk about opportunities to be able to have more direct flights, which would for the future really help the airport be more valuable to the community, but also be able to make sure we have a good experience and continue to operate the airport as an enterprise. So that would really be more one-time funding that would hopefully generate opportunity for additional revenue to come into the airport directly and help sustain itself. It was quite concerning towards the middle and end of the pandemic for the airport, but they've made changes and you've authorized those with some parking rate changes and things of that nature. We also don't know what will happen with the federal and state ask related to the solar project, which could have some positives, but will have a CIP impact if we're successful. And then the 2025 decision packages, there were a number of decision packages that are built into the budget, and there were several requests that were not funded. And so We do have some detail about that, and when you roll those all up to $1.5 million, that's not insignificant. And so we were trying to, balance the incremental need of having additional resources, but also recognizing that that can't all happen in one year. We have to be thoughtful about the overall impact to the capacity to provide service, but also the overall impact to those who are paying for, often a number of these are property tax related. So just important to point that out. Actually, I think all of these might be property tax related. They are, because there was a bunch of transit ones that aren't here. So $1.5 million approximately that is related to the levy. But important process improvements associated with this, having 24/7 IT service. It's 2024, we should have that. Making sure that we continue to move forward with the 8-step plan for fire. So, but of course, the whole 8-step plan would have been a little bit more than that amount if we did it in 1 year, and then none of those other decision packages would have been able to come forward. So it is an opportunity for us to continue to work forward on having a more holistic financial plan for the whole city, and certainly for the departments that are in the general fund together, so that we can make sure that we're planning ahead for growth across the city in a way that is balanced with the cost of living here. So those that weren't approved added up to almost 1.2 million. So you can start seeing with about $800,000 is 1% of levy. We would have been up in the 11s or 12s had this been brought forward. It doesn't mean that you couldn't look at it, but we obviously, we do have other offsetting things. So we have the COPS grant that allows us to start the Link Rapid Transit hires for 6 police officers and a sergeant in advance. And so that will also potentially impact some of the downtown area. It doesn't mean that these things are not important or that you will not see them again. I imagine that you will see them again. It's a matter of building in opportunity and balancing really the resources and the outputs that we have for the city. So that's where that is sitting. And then the 6-year forecast should not surprise you, but it increases every year. And that is not dissimilar from the last 20 years. We have seen increases each year, probably about 6% of that. So about 6 out of that $10 million in property tax levy is to continue to be the exact same city with cost of living adjustments, merit adjustments, meeting the contract requirements we have for employees, but also for other services that we contract out. So mitigating that would be challenging. We actually were able to mitigate that between 2020 and 2023, but you may remember from a prior slide that we had some mitigating revenue in order to do that, which was that holistic budget stability funds, federal funding that we were able to appropriate in order to kind of dig out of the challenge of being at a zero levy. And what this shows is that we are back at a prior trend. And that with the local government aid per capita, what if there had just been increasing dollar amounts and we had also increased our tax levy the same amount that we had before, we would have significantly more revenue to be working with as a city. But that would have assumed that local government aid increased about 2% a year, and instead it has been declining. We're fortunate that it is about flat, but with the current formula, it will decline a little bit each year going forward, most likely, although this year we had like $60,000 increase, so we're very excited. So it's just a reminder that we are going it alone, if you will, with the property tax levy here, as far as the tax supported funds. And then other funds, so we're out of the general fund, we're into other funds, special revenue funds and enterprise funds. So the equipment revolving fund, we have limited some replacements, even though that's a significant dollar amount. We have been working on a pilot program with public safety. Thank you for those approvals with enterprise, try to get vehicles, before 3 years from now. And we'll continue to monitor to see how that goes. We also have a fleet study that's going on simultaneously. And that is important because we have almost 340 vehicles that are fully depreciated that we're carrying as surplus, which means until this year, thankfully or a little bit last year, well, a little bit this year and a little bit in 2025, We have now started putting money aside for those fully depreciated vehicles. So for people to keep their surplus, we now have I believe it's 10% of the value of the vehicle that's starting to go to that fund. We actually have interest rates now, so hopefully to really get the equipment revolving back going. But that is going to take some time and continued focus in order to be able to really have the funding source that's necessary to continue to revolve those vehicles. And then the workers' compensation fund, the trends have been a bit challenging there. So we've been increasing some of the contribution rates from the various departments. The way that works is it really, in the industry, there's more and less susceptible types of positions. And so we look at what the trends are. We had been having some pretty significant challenges with some of the PTSD that's kind of leveled off a little bit, but we carry those challenges in perpetuity, those that had occurred. And then the facility renewal fund. So you may recall 2 years ago, we started talking about this. We had been in the current budget at $800,000 set aside to continue to reinvest in our facilities. We had started at 0 in 2022. And so all of those roofs and air conditioning units were in competition with new things, which is not very exciting for a city council. And in this 2025 budget, we're projecting to set aside $1 million a year for that to be able, that's not an ideal number, but it's getting us closer to being able to be in that space of the depreciated value of our assets so that we know that, we're going to need to do roofs here and there, just like on your own home or windows. And then, as was mentioned by Mr. Parrish, focusing on having any excess lodging tax go to help support those facilities and potentially others if we start seeing additional increases in the lodging tax, and identify different facilities that are contributors to hospitality. So that can help from another side of things to be able to get to that $5 million goal more quickly and with different revenue sources. That brings us to the end of this and some questions. Again, this is intended to be very high level, so it's intended to get you thinking about the budget. It's not the last time that we will discuss it, but we are at the beginning again. We have meetings this week and next week with the departments to understand what their concerns are, if they have different contracts or software agreements that have increases they weren't expecting, those types of things.
Got it. Thank you. Councilmember Bransford.
Just one real quick question. If there's any one thing staff really wanted but isn't budgeted for, what would it be?
Probably everything and more than the 20.
Yeah, I had to pick
right?
one.
Well, staff is like 14 departments, right? So, I would probably say any number. I can't really answer that because depending on who you ask, they would have a different answer. I'm fairly confident that if you ask the police department, they would put forward what they had come up with or something similar, right? And so we do have the opportunity to talk about that. So if there have been changes, like significant amount of overtime in a space, and it doesn't make sense to continue to do that, we do have the supplemental process for a reason. But the intent isn't to reinvent the policy strategy of the budget in the second year. It's really to address challenges that either have exacerbated and created some other financial concern, or to address things that weren't expected. We started putting together the 2024-2025 budget over a year ago, so.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, well, we could have everyone come up and say, and they'll say, and there was one I didn't put in even.
Yeah. Councilmember Palmer.
I got a bunch of questions for you. Let's start out with bold forward construction revenue. Do you think that that's going to end up, are you going to track it so it's a net zero to the taxpayer, property taxpayer? Is that the goal here?
Well, what we have presented to the city council and the way that we would account for the positions that are associated with that is that we will be charging any costs related to that to a special ledger. And so it will be net zero to the taxpayer, except for the taxpaying entity that's paying the contract or the construction permits.
Okay. When Mr. Parrish was here, he's talking about the lodging tax, and he's also talking about the sales tax. At the sales tax time, he said that inflation probably helped that. Well, didn't inflation help out the hotel motel tax since 2019?
Councilmember Palmer, I would say it's a little bit unique in the hotel space, mostly because you have to think about the price of a room night, and they're pretty cautious about overly increasing the price of a room night. Inflation probably was harder on the business than maybe it was on the lodging tax. I think the, you've seen a lot of changes in hotels and how they offer service and asking. So many hotels will not provide, say, maid service if you aren't there for less than 3 days, things of that nature. So it really doesn't work quite exactly the same way with the lodging tax, because that average daily rate that they're charging, they need to look, generally, they look across all of their competitors to try to price in a way where they're not pricing themselves out of the market. So just a little bit different than just a straight tax.
Okay, and I know that this is a high level of conversation, so, and I know that we want to keep our AAA bond rating, but I know we have a certain percentage we need for reserve funding. I think it's 43%. Where are we at with that?
I don't have that exact number right now. We are still finalizing the audit, but that will come to you in June. We, in the 2022 audit, we're sitting, I want to say, around 46%. But our goal is not to be right at the minimum, which is, I think, not less than 42%. The goal is to have appropriate amounts, and as you continue to see increases in the actual overall cost of, excuse me, the general fund, 42% of a larger number is a larger reserve. So as we continue to see adjustments in the general fund and the expenses in the general fund, the actual dollar amount to meet that percentage, it needs to be larger.
Again, we all want to keep our AAA bond rating, but at some point that should be pretty much what the suggestion is, and we should try to hit that. So another question for you is the 2012 sales tax that was fulfilled, I think, in February. What do you project the leftover dollar amount will be?
Councilmember Palmer, I don't believe that we actually are collecting that until sometime this month. I don't think it was February when we ended collection of the sales tax.
Yeah, and you just have to realize, so there'll be a reconciliation where and sales tax information from the state is about 2 months behind for us. And so it'll be like probably March, April, when the 2012 tax would have been satisfied. And then we'll transition into the 2023 tax. So we'll work on that reconciliation. We have funding categories for all the different items that'll basically just reserve in. So nothing really changes from that perspective. We just kind of base it off of the 2012, legislation that we have in terms of how we allocate or what remains to be funded or available for future projects.
Okay. And then the decision packages that funded in 2025, I've got a couple questions on that. One of them is, I see you had $63,000 for aquatics at Silver Lake. Were we planning on keeping Silver Lake open next year?
That was related to the splash pad features, if I recall.
So that's going to cost us $63,000 a year to maintain?
That was anticipating the improvements to the park that still includes a significant amount of splash pad facilities that will require people to maintain it.
Okay. So we'll see a little bit of a bump on that, but we don't know how much yet for next year.
Well, we didn't come forward with a request as far as anything of that nature, but I think you'll probably be under construction next year. I don't know that you're gonna, I don't know that the pool will be done next year. I think it depends on how quickly they can advance.
Okay. And I'm kind of curious because there's some items in here that are $10,000 and $5,000. I would think with the big budget that we have that really those are minor issues. I mean, do we really look that closely at?
So we do a whole baseline adjustment, which is filled with, small reductions, small increases, and that baseline process is really for things that we're already doing. We already do a service a certain way, or we already have a certain contract, or we already have an employee, or we already are providing a certain level of service. So regardless of the dollar amount, if there's something new that we haven't been doing before, and it's a different level of service, or we're providing that in a different way than we have in the past, then that still needs to come in as a decision package, a decision about whether or not it makes sense to both fund and move forward with operating in that way.
Okay. And I know we're trying to be high level here and this is the first for this year. So you have one here and for snow grooming equipment for 213,000. Is that for Game Haven? Where are we doing snow grooming?
Councilmember Palmer, that is primarily for Game Haven, although it could be used for trails and a couple of trails in some other places. I don't think they plan to do a significant amount of going all around town with that. That would have had some other operational impacts, personnel, et cetera.
Okay. And then the library security and safety specialist for 113, is that an outside firm? Is that a policeman? What are we doing on that?
That is not finalized, but that is based off of what the library in Duluth has authorized. I believe they started this 2 years ago, and that is having specialty in the library in order to be able to make connections to the police department or services, whatever would be most appropriate. So it would be a position in the library, and it would have specialty. Currently, it is slated to be a position and not a contract. So think about similar to the county having the 8 folks that are mental health and drug and alcohol addiction. It wouldn't be that, it wouldn't be as more social work, but it would be someone who was more prepared to be able to have those interactions with either someone disruptive in the library that's not meeting some of the requirements, and be able to mitigate some of the things that do sometimes occur with professionals who have zero training. Well, they have some training in that space, but it isn't necessarily something that they are experts in. And that was one of the most important things that the library had brought forward from their perspective.
Perfect. Thank you for your help.
Sure.
All right, Councilmember Keen.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm gonna try to respond to the things you asked for input on, but first I did have some questions. Just on the projected, it looks like it's projected year over year, 8.5% levy impact. And when I look at what we collected what we'll collect in 2024 compared to what we need in 2025. I believe most of that's driven by labor and labor negotiations, but could you expand on that?
Sure. Each year, I would say between 5 and 6% is related to labor negotiations. That's not like a 5% COLA. That's market adjustments, that's benefits. And we've been shifting a little bit more of the percentage of benefit cost to the employee, but if benefit costs increase, it doesn't shift the entire increase to the employee. That's also, there's unique things in contracts like safety equipment, boots, uniforms. There could be overtime implications that are in a contract, things of that nature. So it's typically about a 5 to 6% levy adjustment just in order to continue to meet those needs year over year. Workers' compensation could show up there. So the actual benefits and labor that are associated. And I would just point out that what we would be anticipating based on recent council direction is closer to 9.05% with the Silver Lake pool and the internal financing of that.
Okay, thanks. We're only 4 months out from December when we approved our 2024 budget. Are there any external factors that are going to come to bear that we didn't know about then, or even internal changes that we should consider as we look at this? The thing that I think of right now is, I think 4 months ago, I think inflation was expected to cool quicker, and it's not proving to be that. Is there other things like that that I'm just not aware of?
Councilmember, there could be a bit of that. I think the largest question mark will be some of the labor negotiations and what other like positions how inflation or other factors have influenced some of those things. We try to compare ourselves. And so I would say that is probably maybe not the biggest change from December, but from when we started putting together the 2024, 2025, there's been a lot of different movement in that space for some of the different positions that will be that are in some of those open labor contracts.
I think that's what's bringing up a lot of our risk in labor things right now has been the inflation. As far another one that just we kind of went over a little bit, but kind of quickly on page 19, you got the Holistic Budget Stability Fund, and we're showing a year over year reduction of $700,000. And that how much that contributes to our budget. Could you again just expand on it, make sure that that means that money has to come from another source, or just to help me understand?
Councilmember Keen, so if you look all the way back to 2022, but for the Holistic Budget Stability Fund, we would have either needed to not bring back some of the positions that were frozen, but they were frozen during a time where there was less activity happening, or this would have needed to be in your levy already. So that had been buying down the cost of the levy. So if you go from 2024 to 2025, in the current budget, you had about $700,000 more dollars in non-tax levy to be able to put towards ongoing operations. And so it's really to mitigate after the 0% and all of the changes that were happening across the world.
Yeah.
As we were moving away from that and knowing that we needed to rebuild some of those positions if we were going to be open again, right? So
Okay.
that's.
I guess I'm thinking of it a little simpler and maybe I don't have it all loaded up, but we need to come up with another $700,000 year over year from 2024 to 2025 to close on even a zero base budget. I think that's what I'm trying to make sure the public understands.
Yes, there has to be other revenue that
Yep.
comes in order to support the expense. Although some of those expenses that continue to come back online were things like building inspectors. So there could be permit revenue, which also started to increase, that was going towards supporting those entities, or the growth in cost of employees in that space is absorbed somewhat by the increase in projected construction permit revenue, even back in 2022 and 2023. So it's not just a question of tax levy or these funds. There's other revenues also that were muted during that time that started to increase. So it's not really a one-to-one scenario. But the policy idea behind this was to mitigate how quickly the tax levy needed to increase in order to get back to that level of service that could change when we were in all of the different iterations of pandemic rules. And that was changing how much service we needed to provide in different spaces. But very swiftly, we came back to a place where people had the same expectations or more from before that. And in order to do that, we needed to reinstate about 11 positions. And we continuously looked at those. They aren't all the exact same positions that were frozen. The
Okay.
departments looked at what is their current need and what would be the most important thing to bring back in order to address where they were, because things changed in our operation as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was looking to see if we'd talk about how we funded that originally through some of our government, our federal money, and now we're spending that down. But the key thing is that it's money we have to figure out where we're going to come up with another way since that money's running down.
Correct. And that is, for lack of a better word, figured out in your projection.
Yep, okay. There are a couple areas as we go through these budgets meeting through 2023 and into now where we talk about these at-risk areas where we're exposed on facilities, we're exposed on vehicle revolving funds. Is there any work in front of me today that says these are nominal improvements towards that, or are we just kind of holding off until we find a better way to resolve those?
I would say that we've made a significant amount of progress. If you look at from 2021 to now, we went from 0 to $1 million projected in funding annually to be able to continue to address ongoing facility. And this isn't like maintenance, this is major facility investments of aging facilities.
Mhm.
The decision on how we're budgeting for lodging tax helps to really say anything over that is going to go towards funding the additional capital investments over time at the Civic Center, the campus of the Civic Center, being able to try some of the enterprise resource funding. You've approved 2 advanced purchases in the last 3 years of fire engines that we don't have one of those yet because they're about 3 to 4 years out. They're 4 years out now. So muting the cost of that, but maybe the largest one is the way that we've projected 2025 actually has a percentage of the current value of the vehicle for the fully depreciated surplus vehicles that are basically operating as part of our fleet and not setting aside any funds. So it's making progress, and that was over $1 million a year of progress.
Good, I appreciate it, because I do see.
It's not
that-
solved the problem.
It's not solved, but
it's
that's
making progress.
an investment we're trying to make towards it. And I want to call that out because I think these problem areas that we call out, we are working on them underneath the budget numbers here. And I want to make sure that's visible.
Yeah, I think the important part of that is we want to try to, as much as possible, future-proof you from having to make these hard decisions.
Yeah.
The longer we don't make those decisions, the harder it is to come
Yep.
out of the challenge that we're facing. And capitalizing on some of the interest rates right now wouldn't hurt to have a little bit. You have to have money to earn interest on. That's not a whole lot, but it's more than nothing. So hopefully that will help make progress. That will then help you be able to make some other different decisions that for more electrification, things of that nature. But when we can barely replace what we have without additional tax levy,
Yep.
that's challenging.
So you asked for input just on like, do these align? And first question is alignment, and I do see alignment with our stated priorities, and we'll need to rework those in the future, but I like that. I mean, as you say, it's an off budget year, so there's only nominal sort of changes. And I do think we're making some progress on these underlying problems underneath it. So again, I appreciate that in what I'm seeing. As far as specific issues are evaluated as part of the supplemental budget, again, I think we just talked about, what do we do with some of those problems areas? I guess I would like to just put out there though, and I know we don't talk about these things, but that normal day-to-day work of, the work that we're doing today, is it still needed? Should it change? Can it contribute back to reducing the levy? And that sort of like customer sort of like, is this the right job we're doing to make sure that we're not doing it because we used to and because we haven't been told we're not supposed to. So those sort of day-to-day changes, I really hope that's involved in the culture of providing our services.
Yeah, I think honestly, if you even just go back to, I know you didn't really ask a question, but I think it's important to reiterate what you're saying. That is probably the foundation of how I and the team look at these decision package requests. None of these were bad ideas. So none of the ideas that came forward that weren't funded were bad ideas, but let's make sure that phase 1 and 2 is working well of the fire 8-step plan, and that we have the time to really build that out before we're adding step, 3. Like, we need, some of these things take time in order to flesh out. And so the worst thing that would happen is if I was going to dedicate property tax levy that you have to vote on the capacity for, and it's not actually ready to be spent. So then you end up with, it increases to your fund balance, and something else that was a really good idea that was ready, that could be impacting the community, ends up in the not funded list. So what will it feel like to have that COPS grant starting early with the Link Rapid Transit and having additional capacity in that walk shed of the Link Rapid Transit, which is primarily downtown? Like, let's figure out what kind of impact that might have and determine whether or not is that still the most important thing for policing, is to have that, or will that mitigate some of the need? It may or it may not, but we have this other opportunity to look at and see how it might work well. So those are maybe some examples of, I always get concerned when I'm like, we have a vacancy rate of a certain amount and we're dedicating tax levy. Let's focus on trying to get our vacancy rate down a little bit, which may come to you in labor negotiations, and then go from there. So every budget process is really, do we really need this now? Have we really optimized what we're doing? Is this increased level of service what the community wants and what the council wants to fund, or are we doing okay with how we're providing it now?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dennis.
All right, thank you so much. So thank you to the staff. Huge kudos to all the work. This is such a complex and a very fragile process, because when we're looking at the magnitude of services, safety, of course, is number one. We don't want to cut essential services for people, but we're working with dollars from people in Rochester who are struggling paycheck to paycheck. So I just want to say thank you to all the staff who have been putting this together. I also want to thank Councilmember Keen and Councilmember Bransford and and Councilmember Palmer, who look at the details, because there's a saying, the devil's in the details. And I know we're talking about over a high level view, but there are like details in this as well. So when we look at the day-to-day changes and how we really impact the budget, it's every single decision people make here on the dais, staff, on, are we doing consultants? Are we doing in-staff? Or are we doing in-house trainings? Are we doing competitive bidding? I mean, all of these decisions add up to real dollars. And I think what I want to know, maybe I have a couple questions. So when we evaluate the power of a dollar, and of course I wear my Goodwill outfits. I wear very little new clothes because the value of a dollar is so important. I know budgets, and I know that there's so many people in Ward 6 who are paycheck to paycheck, who every dollar that we ask them to increase is a huge burden. So I would like to know the goal. And we have this wonderful chart, and Chris, with my ADA accommodations, I get things printed off, so I appreciate that. I love trees, but I also love printed out things. And we see the goals, the priorities, the vision, principles. I think my goal is to not increase the levy. And how can we not increase the levy by still keeping services, by looking at, are we increasing high level positions in the company? I mean, what are the salaries? Are we investing directly into safety? So but my first question, I have a couple, but the first question is, what is the goal? If we're looking at high level kind of what we're doing here, because I mean, there's details, but high level, what is the goal of this year's budget? Is it to make sure that the levy doesn't increase? Is it to, what is the goal for this year?
So the goal this year and in prior years for the budget is to continue to provide quality services, affordable living, economic vibrancy, and growth management to the community. And we do that through day-to-day levels of service that happen from the police department, the library, Parks and Recreation, through how they're maintaining things. There is growth. So when we are updating the Soldiers Field pool, then we need to properly support that. And for example, address that it's going to be about twice the size and serve twice the number of people that the older pool was, and make sure that that's properly resourced. Thankfully, we have a partnership with the swim club to be able to do that, a significant amount of that, but we'll have to pay the energy bill. And if the energy bill is a little bit bigger for a double-sized facility, those are things that need to be in the budget, or we don't open the brand new pool as much. So it's really a balance. It's hard to say what the exact goal is. The goal is really that broad, to continue to be a great place to live, a place where people want to be. That's challenging to do because out of 125,000 approximate residents, there's different folks that have different needs, whether they have a family, whether they're aging in place, whether they have mobility challenges, whether they have all of the different things that could be facing someone. But overarching as a community, we are looking at the system to try to be able to continue to meet the strategic priorities and the vision that was set forth in the community plan by the community. And that is a lot of moving parts. And we do also have state laws and labor requirements that we need to meet. So we have pay equity that we have to meet. So I suppose you could have someone else up here to do this, but I spend time working on it. And the goal isn't as simple as we're adding resource and positions based on the service level that is either constrained or strained and difficult to be able to continue to meet that level of service. Or a significant amount of this is meeting our labor contract requirements.
Okay. I hear, I appreciate, if we want to be positive and platitudes, and I appreciate all of that. But I also, all year, and I know this is, I voted against the budget 2 years because I feel like the last couple of years, because we can do better, I believe. I have seen and I have mentioned places where we can have more transparency, where we could work better with other governments, county, but we can collaborate, we can look at our contracts, we can say, okay, well, let's see what a fire truck, how much does that cost? Can we get a fire truck for a better deal? I mean, 10,000 there, here, 100,000 there, you add that up throughout the year, and that's a levy increase. And so,
And that's what we do, actually. That's a very good point. That is what the staff does every time they come forward in order to purchase something. They go through a competitive purchasing process.
not every time.
Or, well, based on what's required. So when they purchase things, they do go through a competitive purchasing process. If it's underneath the amount and they get quotes and they're looking for quotes, then they look for quotes because the cost of going through the competitive purchasing process may actually cost you more staff time and create capacity issues where we need to add a position then in the next year. So they're very thoughtful about how they spend dollars and making sure that when they come forward with requests, that they're doing that always in mind to make sure that they aren't overburdening the taxpayer.
Well,
And I appreciate that the
I
staff
disagree a
always
little
does
bit
do
with
that.
what I've experienced, but my question is with the audit here at the slide, and I don't know my slide, so I have to hold up my printed slide. The review in June, review of the 2023 audit. I have mentioned several times, and I was involved in the audit. Someone called me up last year and I talked about a lot of things I've heard and things I could. none of that was put into place. Everything that I said to the auditor, to my knowledge, wasn't even acted upon. I mentioned very concrete things that wasn't. And so the auditor that the city uses is a city-funded, chosen, cherry-picked auditor. Is that correct? Or do
I
we
would not
have an
characterize it
outside?
that way. We have
How-
an audit, we have a contract with an auditor that is a separate firm. The city prepares a significant amount of information as required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So there's a process that is followed by all municipalities. Being a larger municipality, we probably do a lot more of the review in-house. There are any number of municipalities that will always have a finding in their audit that they had the external auditor prepare their financial statements for them, which is actually a negative finding because you don't have as much transparency. We don't have that finding because the wonderful finance team does a significant amount of work to prepare a lot of the financial information and then go through that. So a part of the audit that we do with our firm is to make sure that they go through and they do spot checks. So they will pull different bills and things. They also randomly throughout the organization, including elected officials, will identify folks to have an additional conversation with, and depending on the results of that conversation and how viable they think the feedback was, they may or may not take action on something.
So
like
I
that.
don't.
But we always do, and the management and discussion letter, which is included in the audit, takes into account all of those different things. But just because someone said something does not mean that there would be a finding from the audit based on the professional auditing firm that we'd hire.
No, I'm just saying there wasn't even investigation on the things I said. But my question about the audit was, so you mentioned the word "our firm," the term "our firm" would be like, this is our
The firm that we
firm.
utilize.
Yeah. So when I think of an audit, when I think of someone who's a independent, neutral, I think of someone who comes in and say, hey, how can we improve? Let's look at each department. Let's look at the fire department. Well, let's look and see how we can tweak to keep the services, to keep all of the goals and things that you just mentioned, but make it more efficient, more streamlined, make it so that we save taxpayer dollars. So has it been looked at not to use the same firm over and over again for auditing, but to go somewhere completely not connected to the city? We weren't going to use them again, so they don't have to, don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, right? So a lot of people don't, we don't want to mess up our relationship with Rochester. Something that will one time audit, say, we're not going to use you again. We want a true transparent audit. We want to see the credit card statements. We want to see the transactions. We want to see the budget of each department so that we can see how we can do things better. I don't want to use wasteful spending. I'll get gavelled. But how can we make this more efficient so that we don't increase the tax levy? My question is, I have lost a little faith in how the audit system is being processed. So has that been looked at in the future to have a more transparent, less connected to the city, neutral entity looking at an audit of each department of our city to make sure that each taxpayer dollar is used the most efficiently as possible? Because I guarantee you, I cannot vote for a levy that increases on the people struggling paycheck to paycheck in the future. I want to make sure that I can say, if I vote for the tax levy increase, if there is one, I hope not, that I can say, yes, I saw the data, I saw it was transparent, I saw there was an independent investigation of our finances. Is that even been considered? Thank you.
So, yeah, I just want to add a few things. One, I think we have a professional relationship with our auditor. While we hire them, they have very strong standards in which they adhere to, and, with the utmost integrity. And so we feel really good about that. We also do periodically evaluate bidding that, and, I'm not sure where we're at in the cycle with that, but, that's not something I think you're going to see this year or next year, but in the future years, that's certainly something that we can do, and it's not an unusual practice, just to be out in the market for that. I'd also say we have a strong history when there is, an issue that comes up in the audit, that we do follow up on it. We do additional evaluation and research. And, are we going to do the level of audit that's being requested by Councilmember Dennis? That's not necessarily what we do. But we have some of the best audits that you've seen. We have the AAA rating. And so, I think we do have a lot of accountability in place. And in fact, we're going to the next level with that. One of your requests in 2025 is to have an internal auditor position, which is, also again, driven for self-accountability. And, it's really a commitment on our part to always do better and have someone that's objectively looking, that's, connected to the organization so they can see where there's opportunities to be better.
Just instead of subjectively, I would like to objectively. I think that's the issue when we have internal audits. I mean, we want to look at reducing, reusing, recycling. We want to look at how we can think outside the box and not necessarily have someone who subjectively, but who objectively looks at our budget.
So I
Thank
would
you.
just reiterate that all of our departments are objectively looking at their budget. They manage their budget day to day to make sure that if they don't have to spend the entire budget, they don't. They don't spend to the max of their budget. They don't say, here's my training and travel budget. I'm going to spend all $10,000, even if I could have a less expensive flight or take training online, things of that nature. They're looking at that every time. We do not the entire review of the budget. That would probably take you maybe 3 years to complete. But even the presentation that you're going to have later this evening by looking at the parking system is one example of how we, I wouldn't use the word audit necessarily, but review our operations and determine and come back to the city council with how are things operating, what might you be able to do differently. We've done that a number of different things, the enterprise fleet management that the police came forward with, working through the strategic plan for fire. That's not going to cost you less in the levy, but over time, it actually will cost less than if they had just added another fire station. So every single budget that's coming to you is vetted through professionals that have experience in their field of work, that are always looking at what's the other next thing. And probably the hardest thing to do is to say, what are we not going to do anymore? Someone could stand here and say, maybe you shouldn't be funding the outside agencies as much as you are. That's a place where we've seen increases over the last few years, but it really requires some very specific feedback from the council if you want to reduce the levy or if you want to even have a flat levy, because as has been mentioned, there are increases that happen across the organization for employees at all levels in the organization that are part of our labor contract. So if you were going to have a flat levy, you would need to be cutting about $10 million out of your budget. And that is the equivalent, although people ascribe this to a council member, just for perspective, $10 million is approximately the total expense of operating the library for 1 year. I would never come forward and suggest that that's how you should balance your budget if you want to have a zero levy, but there are significant implications to doing something like that. We could say that it's okay to not plow certain roads and say it may take you longer to get to work. We could say we're going to have a 10-minute wait time for people who call 911 for a fire at their house, but we have a goal of 4 minutes. So having a goal of 4 minutes means we have to resource that appropriately, and we want to have the best firefighters in Rochester. We have to pay a reasonable amount for them to be able to cover the level of service that's necessary for a 55 square mile city, the third largest in the state of Minnesota.
I think it's maybe helpful to just say that the audit is not making recommendations for policy changes. It's reviewing our financial practices, assuring that they're sound, and making sure that data is publicly available.
Correct. And
So-
it's about a 4 to 5 month process every year. It is a very, very, very thorough process.
That is transparent.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Wall.
I'm wondering if the last many minutes, and Councilmember Dennis is leaving the dais, have,
Taking a break because of now, it's the ADA situation, so I'm leaving it. Because council does not honor. ADA.
microphone.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I just want to let you know. Okay.
I think that I have the floor and I would
We
like.
do
to-
not have DEI, ADA, and it's required that there's an hour break.
For Dennis, you're out of order.
Well, I'm just.
Councilmember Wall, you have the
pointing out
floor.
that Councilmember
You're
Wall
yelling
points
across
out-
the
Just leave.
chambers. Please step out. We don't yell across the chambers. Go ahead, Councilmember Wall.
Thank you for pointing out.
Like to restrict our discussion to 2025 budget rather than city management, which is where I think that we've been spending a great deal of our last many minutes. I don't think that's been terribly productive. The decision packages for 2025, are they yet a decision package that we'll make a decision on, or they've already been approved?
Councilmember Wall, the decision packages that are in the recommended budget are in the projection. So you could change those, you could make
Okay.
adjustments. If there's something very specific in either the approved that you have concerns about, that would be very helpful to know.
Sure.
And also the why, that could help us to understand. Or if there's something that you really want us to advance forward, that would be helpful. And also whether or not you feel like it's something you want to advance forward and have cut something else out of the budget in order to fund it, or whether you feel like it would be important enough to look at that as a levy component.
So the 1.495 is actually in the 8.55 levy.
Correct. The 1.495, the
Yes.
ones that is in the projection of the
Projected,
levy.
yep. And yet
The
decision packages
nots.
are yet, so that's
Yep.
helpful. That's helpful to hear.
And the
Um,
details are also in your approved 2024, 2025 budget book, the 1,000-page book that's online. The
Violated
details are in there.
Okay. What sector of new construction of this last year led to a dip in the 2023 new construction? It, I think Mr. Parrish talked about that, and it was a slight dip. Why did we have a slight dip? Do you know where
You're
that
just
came
talking
from?
about the building valuation.
Yeah,
data?
building value. Was it residential or?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, there's a lot of variability on building permits. And so, I mean, I think we had a number of areas there. I mean, I think commercial and, it's fairly strong. I think we were down on our single family housing starts, but up in other areas. So I don't know specifically. We can certainly try to follow
I
up on
think
that.
BMC has dug into that a little further for last year's,
Yes.
at least
I
downtown.
do
property.
think you actually almost have to look at it in the reverse, where if you look from 21 to 22, what is it that made that increase from 21 to 22? And I believe that we had some significant school district projects that were coming online in 2022. So that's where some of their building permit valuation.
And the Kellen building and a couple
Yeah.
other major.
I mean, there's a lot of like the school, I'm thinking 21, and actually kind of in the pandemic space or on the tail end of that. Like that was big. They had $160 million levy. So Administrator sounds very on point with that. But that's the nature of the building fund. Like the Kellen building comes or the next, big downtown development comes. There's peaks and valleys in that. But it is interesting, and you get a monthly report from community development that does a really good job of sort of laying out where the permit valuations are and what they were last year. And it's not, it varies year to year. So there's always a lot of shifting that's happening.
And you give us a very optimistic view from the first quarter of 2024.
Correct.
We expect a strong year with projects that we already know of through community development.
Correct. That's part of their pre-development meetings that they can sort of project off of based on where they think things are in the pipeline and how viable they are based on conversations they're having with the development community. I don't know if Ms. Steinhauser has any detail, but otherwise we can get back to you. It is an interesting question.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Wall. I don't have anything more specific than what Administrator Zones and WC Administrator Parrish said, but we will get you that additional information, the detail behind each category.
Thank you. And the last question I have is the lodging tax. As I watch the bump of the years from the low point in 2020, and I realize it's all dependent upon the number of nights and what they're charging per night. Do we expect that to exceed 2019 this year, since we see a continued bump and with some additional hotel rooms available?
Councilmember Wall, council members, Mayor Norton, I do believe that we are projecting that we will see an additional increase. That's part of where we didn't necessarily show it here, but we would expect some amount to flow back to the capital fund. And also we have made some small adjustments to the contract for how much we're providing for operating the Civic Center in order to meet some demand. And they have had some of their own inflationary issues that they've been struggling with. But I think the key here is that we still have time available on weekends, which is unique in a tourist destination, but we have a unique tourist destination. So there's some opportunity there. And we have seen that we've held pretty strong on our average daily rate. So that's been positive, and we've returned a little bit more than some markets on our average daily rate. So that's a more per night that you're getting. I also think that there is potential for us to, we've seen that the Civic Center has sold significantly more convention space even for 2025 and 26 and beyond. The question is, like, at what point will they be at saturation? I do think though that there is potential with some of the software that they're using that has a lot of analytics that knows where people are coming from and based on the market segmentation, how much spend they have, that we could also be marketing differently and more strategically. There's not a significant amount of marketing dollars that goes here, but to really try to make sure that we're capturing enough that we can keep making movement on that average daily rate, as well as the capacity and how full they are in each room night.
Thank you.
I will comment quickly. Thank you for including the equipment revolving and the facility renewal fund. That helps me sleep at night, and I'm really pleased we're continuing to move forward with those. And could you just say a little bit more about the airport? I know we're talking more about it soon, but what would be a potential levy impact from an airport route expansion?
So I would say it's less of a levy impact and more of what I would be planning to bring to you in May is an opportunity to fund a minimum revenue guarantee for some low-cost leisure routes. And so the way that that works, you've done that within the last 4 years. You actually provided a small one for a Dallas route, which hasn't materialized yet, but lots happening in the airline space. We are still in the list. It's a matter of when and not if. When is the plane available for the right point in order to use as little of that minimum revenue guarantee as possible to get the direct on the major commercial American to Dallas, which then connects you into 100, spent a lot of time in the airport, 123 different areas across the country and the globe. So in addition to that being in play still, this would be looking at low-cost leisure market and being able to have that guarantee. So you may not use any of that revenue guarantee if it's authorized, but it would set aside dollars for us to be able to negotiate with the airline to be able to get those low-cost direct routes, which then as you continue to have enplanements, there's revenue that comes back to the airport. So it's really mitigating future concerns about how busy the airport is and how much we might end up needing to rely on other revenue. And so this is really let's make sure we never get there kind of a conversation, as well as some other long-term opportunities within magic number, the next 7 years of being able to make some other progress at the airport with some other operations and being able to increase its on-air revenue.
Okay, thanks for that. It's just really nice with a bonding project related to the airport with so much federal funding coming in. It's nice to see us continuing to think creatively about how to expand services for our residents here. So I think we have the mayor next, and then we're back around to others who have already spoken. So Councilmember Kirkpatrick, are you wanting to speak? Okay, go ahead, Mayor Norton.
Thank you. I was going to do some reframing of the earlier discussion, but I agree with Councilmember Wall that we were off base. So I'm just going to let. When we were framing the budget at the very beginning, and part of this is just in communicating with people in the community and their understanding of the levy and the property taxes and how they work. So as our community grows, our levy grows. Are those amounts, the growth that we're seeing in our community in these estimates? Yeah, this was the one that Councilmember Keene and I were talking about. Those are figured in the estimates that you're showing us. And as we get closer to tax time, I know at the end of every year, that the budget is brought back, and do we make adjustments based on whether we're right or wrong based on what we get from the county? How do you manage that part of the budget?
That's a great question, Mayor Norton. So this specific slide that talks about estimated market value isn't necessarily, it's related to how the 110 million, if it stays at that, of tax levy is distributed across properties. So let's say this really doesn't impact that number. The way that it works is the council determines a number that is necessary in order to support the level of service and services that are provided that rely on tax levy in order to operate. And from there, then we get more detail on how much new construction. So always first, any amount of tax levy is absorbed in new construction. So that absorbs the first dollar of any tax levy increase. And then the valuation adjustment starts to change the pieces of the pie, which starts to influence each individual tax bill. So depending on if most people are familiar with residential tax bill, some people are familiar with a business tax bill, so a commercial one, but if your value didn't change significantly relative to the other values in residential, you would absorb less of the tax levy than someone whose value went up more significantly because their value is going up and it's the proportional share of tax levy is also going to go up for that property. So, this really, the adjustment in the tax levy has little relationship to each and every tax bill. It's really how the actual market changes, how much new construction. So one could argue that a significant amount of new construction growth actually would absorb over time some of its impact, a levy adjustment's impact. And so all of the adjustments we make in the budget are not related to growth. Some of it's catching up with growth that happened 20 years ago. But some of this is really just, absorbing cost changes that happen both to private business and to local governments related to labor contracts and the cost of services, et cetera. But realistically, if we came back and there was no new construction, that might change things for the council. They might say, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that to change and how the levy was going to get distributed. I've seen this happen in other places and say, we are really uncomfortable with that. What are the ways that we could mitigate that between, say, a September and a December, or depending on when we get that, we barely eke it in September. But so I would say I've seen that happen before, but really there's a relationship, but it's a finite relationship between how the growth in the property value is and how the growth in the tax levy is related. I don't know if that explained it better or worse. We do have a video.
We do have a video, and it's just one of those questions that comes up every year, and it's very confusing for folks when we talk about our levies going up. But if we have a lot of growth and we're not adding new staff, the money goes a little further. But I think there's just this idea that when we need more money as a city, that the levy increase of 3% means their bill's going up 3%. So anytime we can have an opportunity to clarify that, I like to take it. So thank you.
All right, Councilmember Bransford.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the not funded, or one of the packages not funded, and that is the 2 police officers for the downtown beat. DM or Full Forward Unbound, UMR is growing, businesses are coming back downtown, more people are visiting, the Civic Center is getting more and more concerts and shows. I'm just curious if you could comment on, and I'm sure there was an extremely good reason why it wasn't funded, and I just thought I'd give you an opportunity or to understand, for us to understand why it isn't.
Sure. Thank you for that question. A couple of different factors why I wasn't comfortable putting that in yet, and that doesn't mean you won't see it in 2026 or some other version of that, right? But we were successful in getting a COPS grant, which allows us to start the Link Rapid Transit, 6 officers and a sergeant early. So we're finalizing that grant agreement now, and then we'll be going out to hire. So that is going to, we will be able to hire that in advance of Link Rapid Transit actually being underway. So this budget contemplates that, so that's more than 2. And with that change with Link Rapid Transit, I think it will be important to understand how does that complement of officers, considering that won't just be riding on Link Rapid Transit, that will be the stations and sort of the walk shed, the basic walk shed. What kind of impact is that able to have? As well as we, unfortunately, but like many police departments, have this turnover and vacancy rate that's happening in the police department. And so on any given day, we have about 10 vacancies. So funding something where we're already having challenges with vacancies feels like that's something that ends up taking tax capacity and perhaps not able to actually fill those positions and meet that need when we're in a labor negotiation year, et cetera, where there may be other things that come up.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. I just want to go way back to the permit fees and when they come in, it's done cycle wise. And so you'll get a big building like the Proton Beam building, and that comes in, they pay their fee, and then that's set by the state. We take that money in and then we start doing inspections. And so the city of Rochester doesn't do what a lot of cities do, and that is push or pull permits ahead or behind just to do it. We do it basically whenever it comes up. But we're lucky with the large buildings that we have that we do that. The last thing I'll talk about is I do support your 9% thought process here in your airport investment. I think is a great investment for Rochester, and I'm looking forward to some other items on that. So thank you.
Final comments? All right, thank you, Administrator Zalms. We will take a 10-minute break and restart at 5 o'clock. Sorry. It's round number.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
And parking director, and along here with me, I have a whole parking team here. We've got Nolan Shield, who's our parking systems manager. We've got Sam Bazina, our traffic and parking manager. We also, with the city, we've got, of course, Wendy Turry and Cindy Steinhauser here to support our parking program. And then we also have our operating contractor, SP Plus, Mitchell Lewis, and Chris is also here with us. And then we have our Walker team consultants that did the parking rate study, also here to support us. So they're here to help in case I forget anything, or if I misspoke on anything, they will correct me. But we have a whole team here to support this program. So why are we here today? It has been a while. The last rate study was in 2020. And in updating the rate study, we haven't come to you to just provide an update on what our parking systems are, the challenges and future needs that we need in order to sustain our parking, and then also to get direction from the City Council on recommendations and next steps. So that's why we're here today. So you can see here the agenda. We have a lot of information. We want to give an overview of our parking program. If you can hold your questions till the end, some of your questions might be answered in later slides. So, but definitely if you got questions, go ahead and ask and we can help provide some context to it. Parking is part of a large integrated system to move people across the community and region, and these are the tactics that we have here. It also includes ramps and on-street, off-street, residential permit parking, also including transit and park and ride locations. Quick overview of what we have. Well, not quick, but an overview. The goals of public parking is to support our community and the downtown growth and vitality. We want to be self-sustaining and fiscally responsible. I mean, we heard about the budget before. Parking is an enterprise fund where we don't utilize any tax levies, so it needs to be self-sustaining. And that we make it available to everyone. It's safe, clean, and everyone has a positive experience, easy to use and reliable. And these are consistent with what we heard from our downtown task force, businesses, and other stakeholders, and what we heard from our surveys, as we'll talk about later. Again, the outcome of this is to contribute to the community downtown growth and vitality, and of course, being self-sustaining and fiscally responsible. We have our transit and parking department, which used to be under the Public Works Department. We will now report to the Assistant City Administrator. As you can see on this org chart, we've got transit and parking. Both are different enterprise funds that don't commingle the funds. And today, what we're here to talk about is the parking, not transit. Some of our recent successes, of course, we've had more than this, but we did hire a new contractor, SP Plus, in 2022. Their contractor or their contract ends in 2026, and they are our operator. We have here Mitchell and Chris here, and they are our eyes and ears day to day on the boots on the ground. They have been collaborating with us and other stakeholders, also focusing on safety and cleanliness. So last year, we did have a 9-month security contract that we did that amounted to about $142,000, and this was partly using contingency funds. We did a survey, and earlier, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, where 59% felt safe and 74% felt the facilities were clean. We haven't done a survey like this before, so that's kind of like our baseline. Next year, when we do another survey, this will be a good comparison on how much we can improve or how much we've improved. Along that same line, as part of that, we did just initiate or procured a new security services contract for the next 3 years that will monitor the RAMs on the weekends or overnight, 7 days a week. So we have that going. It's just recently approved last council meeting. Last year, we also did a 2-hour free parking. Again, we have always had a 1-hour free, but last year we did 2 hours free for about 2 months during the holiday season. And we had about, let's see if I can remember the number here, about 16,000 parkers increased during that time period, so it was pretty good. What that amounted to about was about $93,000 in revenue that was unrealized. So that was the trade-off. We also updated our residential permit parking ordinance. What this did was it simplified the program, made it easier to understand. It created a new process for, a new process for residential permit. It eliminated a couple of the permit zones that wasn't well utilized. And then we also got a new parking management system software in early 2023, and that was for our permitting and enforcement. So it makes it easier for people to use. Now the ramps, we have 6 ramps. The way I remember how many ramps we have is the last one's called ramp 6. So we do have inconsistent naming on our ramps. If you look at the picture here, the oldest is on the upper left, going to the bottom right is the newest. The newest obviously is from 2019, so that's about 5 years old. The oldest is pretty old, it's 62 years old. So we do have a aging, some of these ramps are aging. And, but at the same time, and if you haven't been to all of them, you know, I'd invite you to at least go in for an hour. It's free, in and out. But definitely it does feel a little different in some of these ramps. So if you have used it before, we have about 3,500 spaces, and we have about 1,400 monthly contract parkers. I think this next slide is kind of, it's interesting. This is the amount of usage that we have on our ramps. This is a snapshot of April 2023, just random snapshot. The big circle pie chart there is for all ramps, and then you can look at the breakdown per the ramp. Now, if you look at this, the biggest portion of it is the yellow highlighted one, which are the free exits. Now, the free exits include the 1 hours free, the evenings are free after 5, and then weekends. So it is a large portion of our usage of the ramps. And then depending on the ramp itself, then it varies on like, for example, Center Street has the most transient parkers. 3rd Street has the most monthly parkers or monthly contracts. And then 2nd Street has the most hotel validation. So it is a little unique on how these ramps are mostly utilized. But for the most part, all these ramps have, the biggest percentage is the free exits. So. Oh, one more thing on that. So we have the percentage in regards to like the number of parkers, but we don't, it's hard to equate it to a dollar amount because we don't know like how many parked on the weekends and what that would equate to. So there's no dollar amount that we can associate with that. But in general, what we can say is if it's $3 to park per time, there's about 315,000 parkers that do the free exits. And so you can just do the math, and that's quite a bit. Our surface lots, as you can see, are highlighted yellow on here. The surface lots are in kind of a hodgepodge type of status. We have surface lots that we can pay by meter. We have some surface lots that we pay stations, and then there's pay box. So there's really not a consistency, and there's an opportunity to make that more consistent in regards to branding and just updating the signs and space there. We do have monthly contracted spaces in these surface lots also. So as far as conditions go, as you can see, we have, again, 6 ramps, and intuitively, of course, the newer ramps are in excellent condition, and that's 3rd Street ramp and ramp 6. They also have the newer technology, such as license plate reading, number of parking spaces that are available. And so if you have parked there, it does, you know, it's really nice, the technology piece of it. And then in good condition is our Civic Center and our First Street ramp, and those are kind of the middle-aged ramps. The two ramps that require the most repair and maintenance right now is our Second Street ramp and Center Street ramp. So just recently, we came to the council for approval to go ahead with the construction of these two ramps. And that's about 6.5 million for these two ramps, and that number is going to come up later. But the construction of these two will be for the next, starting this year into next year. So, and then, of course, the surface lots. Again, we have, our pavement is aging, it's cracked. Lighting also, some of them we need to replace. There's inconsistent signing, as I mentioned, and just different pay methods at these different lots. So on-street parking, we have about 1,300 on-street parking, and the map here is kind of hard to read, but we wanted to include it here to show you the complexity of the number of different types of time limits at these meters. It ranges from 30 minutes to 10 hours max. I think there's 5 or 6 different types of meter limits, and so it is confusing as a visitor, or even, if you frequent it. Obviously, if you have a space you always use, you're familiar with it, but it is hard to understand. And even I don't remember where all these are, but anyways, it's complex. We also have smart meters that we've installed in our downtown core. And these smart meters, if you've seen, on here it's yellow, but we do have different colored ones too. And these smart meters are, they're smart. They can sense when there's a vehicle in place. It can be programmed remotely. If there's an issue, it tells us right away so that we can change or update it. And it also accepts 3 different types of payments, like coins, credit cards, and pay apps. So it's pretty good. Let's see.
Can we ask one clarifying question? Sure. Mayor
Yeah, I
Hart.
was just curious, when you have these no time limit 10-hour meters, what would it cost someone to park for 10 hours?
Sam.
So we enforce parking restrictions from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, which is actually 9 hours. Our 10-hour meters, which we're proposing to change to no time limits, you'd be able to park, they're 50 cents an hour. So it'd be $4.50 a day. If you pay with Park Mobile, there's a 35-cent transaction fee, so it'd be $4.85.
Sam gets all the fun questions.
I knew Sam would have that.
I know.
I'd have to do the math. This is another SAM one, so if you have questions, but it's a residential permit parking, and we have 12 zones. Obviously, the purpose of these is to prevent employee parking to congest the neighborhoods. So these zones are on the bottom right, if you can read it. Some are more, there's more permits in some than others. Like in one of them, there's only 1 permit in that zone. But anyways, there are 12 zones, and that's another way we generate revenue. We also have like the annual permits, and the city clerk. There's 2 positions in the city clerk's office that helps us with this. That is funded through the Parking Enterprise Fund. Parking enforcement, there's 4 police officers that are funded through the Parking Enterprise Fund. That's 4 more positions. Most of the citations are expired meters. Of course, citations can also include like people parking in no parking zones, overnight parking, time limit violations. And so we have about 25,000 citations issued annually. What we are looking at is reviewing these citations and getting a better understanding of this. And we will bring forward a resolution to the council in regards to these citations and recommendations. So look forward to that. We don't have those right now, but that's one of the things that we'll be doing. So on to our parking rate study. Here comes the interesting stuff. So in 2020, that was the last rate study that we did. There were recommendations that were implemented, and then, but not all recommendations were implemented. The previous one to 2020 was in 2017. So, you know, rate studies can be done, performed periodically. The current rate study that we had started back in late 2023. Our Walker consultant, as I mentioned, is conducting the rate study for us. We did some surveys and stakeholder listening sessions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here, evaluating our current parking system. And then also into the next phase, looking at our financial analysis and doing some modeling and developing recommendations for us. And here we are right now to present what we've done so far and make and evaluate the system. And then we'll have a final rate study report later this year. So what did we hear from our engagement? Nothing that we haven't heard before in regards to, like, we've got feedback from Downtown Task Force, we've businesses, stakeholders. We did a survey, electronic survey, 780 responses, and 90% of that was from Rochester residents. I think that, well, we'll talk about the recommendations, but this was a really good one to just get that feedback. And what did we hear? We heard some positive things. About 2/3 of respondents said that they could always or usually find available parking, which is good. But that parking is not convenient to access during busy events. So some things that we could improve. Communications and signage is another thing where we've got to get that, that's one of our, part of our recommendations later is how do we improve that. Of course, people like free, so free parking for nights and weekends are always a good thing to encourage downtown activity. And then that we should accommodate all people in our downtown with all different types of mode. What we also did was a peer study review. We looked at different cities that are similar to our size and population and large institutions. And what these cities, what we looked at was the on-street and off-street. And this is just a really high level of a comparison, but for the most part for on-street, we're similar in prices and enforcement. What was not common that we have here is that 30-minute and 90-minute time limit. And as I mentioned in that map with all the different colors, that's where it comes in, is it's complicated with those different types of time limits. What I forgot to mention also was that we do have high usage in those 30 and 90-minute time zones. And what that indicates to us then is that it's not properly priced, because we want at least 60 to 70% availability so that there's that turnover for on-street parking. Also for off-street, similar infrastructure with our other peer agencies, similar free nights and weekends, but what was a little different was that some of the cities, like we have free evenings after 5, but some of them, they enforce it until 9 p.m., so it's a little bit later. Some cities also enforce parking on Saturdays, where we don't enforce it all on Saturdays and Sundays, so there's a little bit of a different difference there. Similar daily ramp rates, and most don't offer first hour free, and how that works is that then they just have a lower hourly rate. So that's how they make that up. One thing that some of the cities do is they use tax levy to subsidize their parking. We don't do that. So we don't have any tax levy for our parking. We also took a look at our financial health for our budget breakdown. And in this pie chart, we've got revenues on the left and expenses on the right. We don't have our capital on this slide here, but we'll have the capital in another slide later. In general, just high overview, the revenue for last year was about 7.3 million in revenue, and then our operating expenses were 5 million. So if you do the number, yes, we're in the positive, which is good. And we'll talk about that later, because as you can see, our parking ramps is the biggest one that accounts for these revenue and expenses. 70% comes from revenues from parking ramps, and then of course 66% expenses goes towards ramps. But then at the same time, 90% of our capital is utilized through parking ramps. And as I mentioned, 6.5 million on our Second Street ramp and Center Street ramp. That's a large number, so. Different ways we get revenue streams. I've talked about most of them already. But again, we've got contracted parking, transit parking. Again, we charge fees from 2:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. So again, no overnight parking. That's why there's that 2:30 a.m. But everything else is free. So weekends and, anything after 5 p.m. is free. We also get a little bit from bike locker leases, not a lot, but that is still something that we generate revenue from. And then we have our validation programs with our hotels and businesses. We do have EV chargers, and we have EV chargers on 4 out of the 6 ramps. The ones we don't have at is Second Street and Civic Center. So we have those. On-street parking, of course, we talked about the meters and the enforcements and residential permits. So on to our capital improvement. We talked about revenues and expenses in our capital improvement budget. Talked about our Second Street and Center Street ramp already. Of course, those are high dollar amounts that will be about facade repair, continuing the structural integrity of these ramps, traffic coding, mechanical, electrical, plumbing repairs. So there's quite a few things that needs to be done on these 2 ramps. And then we also have our technology upgrades. So as mentioned before, Third Street ramp and ramp 6 is our newest ramp. So they have that technology, but then all the other 4 don't. A lot of the equipment is so outdated that they don't even replace them anymore. So we really need to update our technology. And so that's another large contract that we're undergoing right now, roughly about 2 million in that. In general, in the next 6 years until 2030, we have about 12.1 million expected capital improvement projects. Our fund balance right now is 17.1 million. And so it's in the next couple of slides, you'll kind of see how that comes into play. But this capital improvement budget here is going to be a big factor into it. So when the rate study, we have to make assumptions. They evaluated our revenue, our expenses, and our capital, and then they had to make some assumptions based on growth. So 1% was utilized or was used based on what they've seen, what Walker has seen on other similar cities our size. And then we also assume that Civic Center North and South lots will still be here until 2027. And this was just looking at like the potential, if there was something that was to occur, how quickly will those lots be taken offline? And so that's just an assumption. It could be later, it could be earlier, but we had to start somewhere. Also, the recommendations that we're going to talk about later is assume that it will be implemented by 2027. So again, it could be earlier or later, but these assumptions are meant to say that there's going to probably take, some of these can occur right away and some will take time for us to implement it. So those are the assumptions that goes into the next couple slides. Some of the key takeaways on these financial modeling is that, as mentioned, our fund balance of 17 million is used for our capital improvements. And then I talked about the technology of the 2 million. But at the same time, when we have a revenue of 7.3, but expense of 5 million, you say, oh, that's good. But eventually that's not going to be. Operating expenses are going to outpace the revenue if we don't do anything. So eventually we're going to eat into that parking fund balance. And also, we also have to consider the ramp 6 debt service that continues through 2040. That plays into our budget also. So rate changes are not immediately needed, but it will be needed in the long term. And I think the next slide is actually a very good slide if you're a visual person, to look at it. And that line that you see there is our fund balance. And as I mentioned, 17 million is our fund balance from 2023. You'll see it starts dipping down because of our huge capital need that we need. And then in 2025 there, it gets to our desired minimum balance of 8 million. So we want to make sure that we keep that fund balance at 8 million for any like emergency needs, or if things should occur, we need that. We are self-sustaining, so we need to make sure that we continue to be so. A few times you see the red arrows, it dips below that 8 million. We're looking pretty good at with those assumptions of the 1% growth and of that. But then in 2033 is when we really start dipping. So we at this time, as I mentioned before in the previous slide, we don't, like in the short term, we're good, but in the long term, we're going to need to revisit this. So recommendations. Some of the non-monetary things are the communications recommendations. So talking about like the communications of our system. Again, inconsistent signing, we need to improve on that. So wayfinding, our deployment of our brand. We have different signs on our different ramps, just better way to do that. Also, along with that website, with usage of that, our stakeholder engagement strategy, I thought that was really good, what we did last year, and we're going to continue to do so. So creating that outreach plan. And then an annual reporting. We haven't done that before. And I think that what's really good is just to show you, even in those pie charts where we had like, you know, X amount, a high percentage, almost 50% of free exits. I think something like that is really telling of our system. So an annual reporting is something that we will start coming next year.
Ms. Jean, Councilmember Bransford, you'll wait. Okay.
Okay. All right. Otherwise, I'm okay. Then rate recommendations. So these are just the areas that we are, the slide is just meant to say, hey, there's different rate recommendations that we're going to present. So on-street, parking ramps, surface lots. So on-street parking, as we talked about the different types of time limits, what we want to do is simplify it. So we're going to eliminate the 30 and 90, our recommendations to eliminate those two types, create just the 3 hours. And you'll see that it's increased rate from the current, but then there's no time limit on the no time limit will stay the same. The 3 hours is meant for the downtown core, and then everything outside of that would be the no time limit. So that's our recommendations for on-street. For the parking ramps, you'll see the rates right now in that first column and then the proposed changes. And this is a decrease. What we want to encourage is that ramps are cheaper than on-street parking. So in the metered section, I mean, if you were to park on-street, our first hour in ramps are free. So if you were to park 2 hours on the ramp, it's $2. But if you look at the on-street ramp, if you were to park it's $2 an hour, so it'd be $4. So basically, it's to encourage parkers to park on the ramp. It starts to increase at the end for the long-term parkers. Those would be there would be a slight increase on that, and most of the time, a lot of these long-term parkers they have the option to buy monthly permits, so that's an option for them because that's at a discount. We don't recommend at this time for any changes to our contract parking. The surface lots. This is a little bit of a busy, chart here, but for the most part, what we're trying to say here is that it is, we want to simplify it. These ramps or these lots have different time limits and different charges. Some of the, like for example, our government south lot there, it's not very well utilized, so we're recommending that to decrease it to 50 cents an hour. And then some of these are to just streamline it to match the other lots. Now this slide here shows, like these are additional revenue streams that we're not gonna be recommending at this time unless there is an interest in it. I kind of call it like tools in the toolbox. If we want it, we can take the tool out and use it. If not, we're gonna leave it in the toolbox. Just wanna make sure, of course, there's more than this, but just wanna put some things out there on options. Again, if we wanted to increase some of our revenue streams that as I mentioned, some of the cities don't enforce until after 9, so we could increase that time limit from 5 p.m. to something different. That's an option. We also have validations in hotel parking, and that's an opportunity that we could improve on how we're creating those payments and increase the rates on that. Then we don't do overnight parking permits right now, and that's an option that we could do. We also don't do demand-based transient rates. And what that means is, like, if we have busy times during, like, let's say on a Wednesday, it's very busy, we could increase the rates during that time. We don't do that right now. It's just a consistent rate for our ramps. And then we don't have any event rates. So that's another option. Again, it goes back to the outcome and our goals. It's to help support the community and downtown growth and vitality and make sure that we are also self-sustaining and fiscally responsible. Again, we don't do any tax levy, and we want to maintain that moving forward. But as you can see in that one chart, eventually we're going to have to do something. But as of now, the recommendations that we have put in place or that we are recommending will help sustain us. What we're looking at is for next steps is developing an outreach plan for our stakeholders and downtown businesses, continuing to be in touch with them and servicing what the needs are and the growth. Of course, some of these actions that we have will require resolutions and ordinances to be updated, so we will be coming to you individually on those rates if the rates are to increase or change. And so those will be resolutions that will be coming. So we'll be implementing those recommendations, and I guess that's it. So I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jean. Councilmember Bransford.
So just a couple comments. First, the parking enforcement in Zone 2 around St. Mary's is exemplary. I have a lot of my neighbors who are very happy to see tickets popping up on cars that shouldn't be there, myself included. And I also wanted to thank your team for coming up with a clever solution using meters to stop vehicles near St. Mary's Park. Good job, thank you. Very happy constituents there as well. So the question I have is, I went to an event downtown on Saturday and I noticed, and I reached out and was gonna go grab a ticket, and a little smiley face came up and said, just go on in. And I thought, well, that's clever because you're saving ink and paper. And so I went in and I parked and I was like, this is great because we can just get out. Now, is that something new to save on ink and paper, or is that just, I won some lottery and got a smiley face, or?
Yeah, that's another Sam one, right? No, you didn't program it?
That didn't happen, no.
Well, I won't say what event I was going to. But it sort of begs the question of, that's an interesting thing to consider. If you have so many free entry and exits, you're printing a lot of tickets and using a lot of paper. And so a little light bulb went off in my head. I was like, well, that's a great way to save potentially a lot of money. Then of course, the flip side is I just wait until after 5 o'clock and it's free for me if I've been there all day. So, I get that. But one thing you might consider is doing that on weekends, not on weeknights, because people park and then they could wait till 5:01 and leave and pay, not pay. So I don't know if you've thought of a strategy like that.
Isn't that where the license plate reading comes in? I
Well,
think there's,
this ramp, I don't think had it.
oh,
Yep, we have it, license plate reading on 3rd Street ramp and ramp 6.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I love the smiley face and not having to grab the ticket. And I thought, well, this is really green. This is great.
I
So
don't know if anybody knows about the smiley face. Well, Mitchell does. See, there you go. I
you
told you
come
they're
on
the
up?
whole team. This is Mitchell Lewis. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Mitchell. I'm with SB Plus. I'm with the contractor with the city. We occasionally do program the gates on weekends when it's free to save for those reasons. So if it's free, there's no need to pull a ticket.
okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Good idea.
a follow-up to that? Councilmember Patrick, go ahead.
So is that smiley face savings going to you then, or is it going to the city?
Go ahead. And you can sit here.
There's currently no charge on the weekend, so there's no incentive for the operator to produce the ticket if it's free.
City, is that correct?
I see your question. So any expenses that they have is basically incurred by the city. So they're on our
Okay.
behalf. Yeah.
All right. Thank
They're
you.
kind of like just our third hand. Yeah.
Was just playing off of Bransford's, production, manufacturing,
So their
efficiency
savings is
there.
our savings.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I think the mayor might have a question that I also have, so go ahead.
Well, I have a couple things. One, I want to say, I'm shocked that to learn that 45% are free exits. I think that's a good thing. It says that community is using it and only going down for an hour or two, getting there free and going home. So that was great. I wondered, just quickly, does anyone track the EV use to see if they're being used? So that was a question I had.
Yes, we do. No, do you know?
And if you don't know now, that's okay.
At least one person raised their hand in the audience. Oh.
Yeah, so the EV charging companies do provide us a report each month. I'll just say I don't know like the exact statistics, but they are used on a fairly regular basis. There's some that we receive a small amount of revenue from and some that we don't currently. Going forward, we'll most likely enter into some sort of agreement where the city does receive some sort of revenue just because the ongoing cost of having them is, when it's time for replacement, the city would have to pay for those. So having some revenue upfront is helpful.
Okay.
I just want to add to the EVs. So we, as I mentioned, 4 out of 6 ramps have EVs, but we're also looking at potential grants to install more EVs in our ramps. So
Good. I will say I pulled in and had them both used and not been able to use them, which is fine, but they seem to be being used, but I wasn't for sure. So 2 other quick questions. One is, are you using the Damon? Are you considering the closing Damon? Are you just assuming Mayo's going to take care of all those people that park in the Damon, or are you accounting for that somehow in our parking for the next couple of years?
So yes, we're currently like in communications with Mayo in regards to potential options out there for them. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned in one of my earlier slides, it's just not parking. There's also transit options there too. So that's another thing, working through Mayo's team there on when they're going to need it, how long, how many, how are we going to structure it administratively, like what is the best way to do this. So yeah, that's an ongoing right now.
Okay. Yeah, I would just think that it's going to have an impact and it would be great for us to be thinking ahead about that. So I'm glad you are. And lastly is your parking ramp recommendations. One of the things that the downtown task force heard loud and clear from hourly downtown employees is that those parking ramps are too expensive for them to pay for because they get paid so little in the first place, and they're, and those are going up. Everything else is going down, but those are going up. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I do want to say, while I'm worried and I'm anxious to hear if you're going to be thinking about that, because that was a universal concern we heard for the last year and a half. I do love the fact that on your last slide, you said you're going to have a communication plan, because I don't think people understand the different prices and where you might be able to park cheaper, like in a flat lot or at a meter, and where those are. I think if you can devise a plan that will help a lot of people that maybe currently think the ramp's the option for them, and maybe there's other options, but I am concerned about that increase. So I just wondered if you could address that. And that's all I've got.
Yeah, so you're talking about the employee parking program, and that's something that we could look at. At this time, we're not looking at, we're not making any recommendations. And there's, like, we have these special, in one of these slides about special, evaluating special programs. And that's something that we can take a look at, but we really don't have any, as part of this, because, of course, it's an ongoing, we have been talking about that, looking at different options and how does that work with different employers, small employers, how many employees, do we offer like just a flat, number of tickets? I mean, it's kind of hard to administer. So that's something that's a little bit more detailed than these, but we are aware of that and we're trying to find some resolutions. Yeah.
All right, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. I got a bunch of questions here. So my understanding of the meters was to move people along. Is that correct?
Right, it's for turnover. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not in favor of you getting rid of the 90-minute and the 30-minute meters, because that's not going to move people along. We're just going to have employees come out, plug it, and then people who want to shop downtown won't be able to. So how do you respond to that?
Yep, I'm gonna ponticate that to our consultant, Walker. Do you have a?
Yeah, Kevin White from Walker Consultants. So the idea here is to use the price to incentivize the turnover. So I don't know, Sam, can you clarify whether the current meters allow for plugging beyond the 3 hour or beyond the posted time limit?
Our older coin-only meters don't have a way to detect a vehicle in this space, so you can easily just go add more. It won't let you put up more than 3 hours at once, so you'll have to come back after 3 hours. The new smart meters have the sensors. They can tell when your car has vacated the space, and they won't let you add more time until you've pulled out of the space.
So the downtown post office, you have 4 spots there. You put a nickel in, you get a minute, basically. So you're only gonna be able to have a 3-hour meter there?
Yes.
And so to me, the 30-minute meters, the 90-minute meters make sense. So the question on ramps, and I'm trying to figure out, because there's a lot of open space in the ramps, is there a time during the day that the ramps are full, or are they not full?
Again, that's a lot of detailed information. I don't know, Mitchell, if you're prepared to respond to that. They keep track of all the numbers of when the best utilized times are on the ramps and which ramps are most utilized, so on.
Yeah, so, it really depends on events. Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays have higher occupancy than Mondays and Fridays. It depends on when monthly contract parkers are coming in, when they're going, our hotels booked, what events are at the convention center. There's a lot of factors to it. I can't definitively say we're always full on Saturdays, we're always full on Wednesdays, but occasionally there are events where 2, 3, 4 ramps are full.
So I guess where I'm going on my question is, if we had 2-hour free parking, and everybody says it costs this much money, but if the ramp's not full, there's no opportunity costs that we're losing on that. So, I mean, it's not like we lost money, because if they weren't here, we wouldn't have sold the spot anyway. So that's what I'm asking is there a time during the week that the ramp's not full and we're not really losing any money if we give a spot away for free? Do you understand what I'm saying?
How did you come up with that $93,000? There and what's still there and that you
Would have actually, I mean, you know, the in and out, right? So it's not just based on, it was based on in and out of the vehicle, correct?
Correct. That data was pulled from the 3 of us, from 2023 versus 2024 volume and financial transactions.
I'm not following your math or your idea here. So I guess I'm trying to do simple. How many times is the ramp full that we couldn't have fit another car? So if somebody was gonna pay, they couldn't get in. And people who came in for 2 hours who were here, they got in for free. I mean, did they steal money from people who were actually wanting to pay? Question.
Are you specifically asking how many days are full over the course of a year?
So there's a slide that talks about when we went to 2 hours free and subsidized that with contingency and part of the parking funds, it talks about the opportunity cost of that being $93,000 of unrealized revenue, which is an approximation that is derived how? I think that's the question.
Thank you for the interpretation.
So
A different question.
go ahead, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, we did have, numbers to back that up, and I know that we looked at previous, ridership, or not ridership, parkers, and, what the parking, increase was. And so there was some, uh, like extrapolation of like what those parkers utilize the 2 hours free. And I don't remember the details of that calculation, Mitchell, but if you did that.
The number of tickets that were pulled from 2023 versus the number of tickets that were pulled during the 2 hours equated to 93,000. So
And so the ramp was full, and so we lost that much money. See, that's where my question's coming.
not necessarily.
So Chris Schroeder from SC Plus. So what happens when you offer the 2-hour free parking is you have people that would normally come down and pay for that parking, and then you have some new people. So what you're doing is cannibalizing revenue that you were receiving previously in the 2-hour structure before. Now you are adding some additional volume to your facility by allowing people to come down, but you're still cannibalizing the people that would normally park for those 2 hours during that time frame.
Okay, and I guess I'm looking at like the hotel where the bed is open tonight. If I don't sell it, I don't get to sell it. So if I have a parking spot that's not full, I'm not really losing any revenue. Because you're saying we're cannibalizing and I'm not following
No, I
that.
think people that normally would have been there and paid for one of those hours are not paying for the 1 hour. So you are losing revenue from the parkers that otherwise would have been there and paid for 1 hour of parking or more. They may end up paying for 10 hours instead of 11.
So, okay, I guess I'm not making, I'm not following what you're saying. So let's go off the surface lots that you have. So when we convert your surface lots and we sell them, does the revenue then go to the parking fund or where does that money go to?
Yes, all this goes to the parking enterprise funds.
Okay, so when we go ahead and sell the north parking lot at Mail Civic, you're gonna get revenue off of that.
Oh, you're talking about the actual sale of the property.
Correct.
Is Aaron still here?
I don't believe so. No, I don't believe that. That would not go back to them, the parking revenue fund. That goes into the general levy.
Why wouldn't it go to the parking?
So
Sale of a property?
there's a lot of different factors related to, let's maybe use an example of a ramp and of surface parking. So let's say, I know you asked about a surface parking lot, but we don't subsidize with tax levy, but we sort of subsidize with tax levy because most of the parking ramps that have been created were created as part of something larger. And some of them, for example, ramp 6 have a tax increment financing associated with paying for the payback of those facilities. So for the surface lot that is being contemplated to come out of service in order to do the development on the North Civic Center lot, I'm repeating this so that Aaron can hear me, what I'm saying. I don't know if, I don't believe the current concept is that the sale of that would go back to the parking fund because I don't believe we're contemplating a sale of that if we end up in a development agreement where the cost of the land is part of the incentive for constructing the housing.
And maybe the only other thing to offer too is oftentimes the original parcel acquisition, came out of a general source. Each one of those is unique. You think about the parks maintenance facility, for example, that had an underlying parks use. You can make an argument that we're investing in that facility. It should go back to the general fund to offset that. But in this case, the likelihood in the Civic Center North that we're not creating value, it probably doesn't make as much of a difference. Although depending on the right TIF agreement on that property, you could repay yourself some of the funding with that, but it'd be like in the outer years, depending on what your overall structure is. So we're not expecting to have that good problem. But if we do, we certainly are happy to bring forth.
Well,
some
we
options.
have like 3 parking lots that we're putting up for RFPs. Correct?
Yeah, but the current Civic Center North structure doesn't contemplate provision of, it doesn't contemplate the sale of the land as part of the structure. But you'll get that with the final development agreement, should that come forward by this August.
Okay. The 2 other questions, and one of them is your special events, and I know that, we're happy that there's a happy face and whatever, but what's frustrating is when you sit there and wait for the arm to come up and arm to go down on a Saturday or Sunday, and you've got, 3 levels of cars waiting, why not just raise the arm and let people go through so people are happy with the parking?
Yep, very good question. I think Mitchell has a really good answer for that.
Hi, Councilmember Homer. We do sometimes do that. For our accounting practices, we need to count the vehicles coming in and out, so the loops in the ground do count it. But it is something to be discussed long-term.
Okay. One other question, or 2 other questions. The bike locker use, I know that we have them there. What is the revenue you're getting? I mean, I was told no one's using the bike lockers. Is that wrong?
There is some usage. It's very small, but I don't know what those numbers are.
The seasonal bike locker is $65 a year. The yearly is $85 a year. We have 15, 17 bike lockers around that. They're not all full, so it's minimal revenue.
Okay. A suggestion was made to me that from a marketing perspective is if you almost make this into more friendly parking and advertises that our parking for downtown is friendly instead of, oh, it's always been a problem. And if you read the paper, 50 years ago, parking was a problem. I personally don't see a problem with parking. I've never missed a spot and I probably pay a ticket once a month. But that's my own fault.
He said it here.
So there's just bad time on my part. But I guess, to me, from a marketing perspective, if we can get the ramps full, which I think is what we really want, and get that opportunity cost and get the idea out there that really and truly parking downtown is good. I've got one more big thing, and I'm going to back up what the mayor has said. The downtown employees are having problems and employers are having problems. And if there's something we could do differently to get them in the ramps and not get them on the meters, but also subsidize that a little bit. And I don't know if you ever looked at even free parking or free bus passes for the downtown employees so that they didn't have to pay for busing if that was a problem for them. We're going to be doing that with a rapid bus, but maybe we could start that earlier for the downtown employees, employers, because I know that's a big cost to some of these people. And most of them are only making, the minimum, for revenue. Have we looked at helping that out a little bit more? I know you're not raising the fee, but is there a way to help out the employees that are in the small businesses?
Right. So as I mentioned, we are looking at that employer program on how we can structure that. It's kind of an administrative nightmare. So we just have to work through that and see what it can look like. Currently, right now, there is an incentive for businesses to get a discount for transit passes. And I think one of the things that we can improve on is our communications on that. I don't think a lot of folks know that. And so there's that opportunity if they do want to take that. There's like an annual pass that we can provide to them at a huge discount. So those are things that I think we need to do better in our outreach and communication of options out there for them. So I agree, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Keen?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I had some questions earlier in the day, and I think some of them are kind of getting resolved. There's just some real practical things here. On those parking zones that we showed earlier, we saw some with under 10 people in it. I could make the case that that's not needed, but can someone tell me why we would have a zone? Is that the neighbors just don't want anyone in their neighborhood and they don't want to park there either?
That's basically the answer. But we did update the ordinance recently. So in the past, anyone that submitted enough signatures we'd schedule a public hearing and it would get approved because it wasn't contentious. The new ordinance, we now require a parking study. So you have to not only submit the signatures, but we also have to go out there and study and say, do you actually have a parking problem? There's not enough places to park. And are the people parking there people that don't live in the neighborhood? So we'll go out and check license plates and make sure that there's a parking problem caused by people that don't live there. Like I said, in the past, a lot of zones got created, a lot of restrictions put in place when people really didn't have a parking problem. They just didn't want anybody parking in front of their house.
That makes sense when you're in these sort of like high demand areas when you're right near another employer and that, but okay, so these are in place now. And I think what you're telling me is if you had the authority, you would probably collapse some of those, but you don't have that authority.
Yeah, so around the time we updated the ordinance, we did terminate 2 zones, which were near John Marshall High School and Mayo High School, because the high schools don't charge students for parking anymore, so they don't try to park in the neighborhoods anymore. So we have terminated zones recently. I wouldn't be opposed to terminating about 3 more of them.
As I understood it, those were not city initiated. Those were neighbors coming with signatures saying, we don't want to have these restrictions.
To create the zones, yes.
No, this was to abandon the zone.
So
that's what happened near Mayo.
Oh, well, no, over the course of about 2 or 3 years, it's kind of a block by block. Some of the neighborhoods did petition. We removed like 2 or 3 blocks within the zone. But we actually, Public Works brought forward a recommendation to City Council to entirely just go ahead and terminate the whole zone.
Okay. All right. I actually there might have been a reason that if you have enough trouble with other people parking, blocking driveways, there might be a good reason. But when I see only a couple of parking things it does seem like the goal is having unused streets during the daytime.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All Thank you. Sam, as long as you're up, I'm going to kind of follow up on Councilmember Palmer's thing about we're going for this goal of we're simplifying our system to have only two things. And as I think what restating Councilmember Palmer's, we're losing the precision of what we were trying to do before. Is it a valid trade-off to lose that precision now that it's in place? Because I don't think most people want to understand how the whole city works. They just want to understand where they're parking.
Yeah, so, because there was also a comment about filling up the ramps, and one of the things we've heard is that there's plenty of space in the ramps, and that's true. So by making the cost of parking on the street more expensive, making the cost of parking in the ramp less expensive, we are incentivizing people to go fill up the ramps. When you come downtown, it should be default, like I'm just gonna go park in the ramp because financially that makes more sense. So there's no financial incentive to stay parked at that meter for 3 hours. If you're gonna be there for 3 hours, particularly in front of the post office, which is in between two parking ramps, it just makes more sense to park in the ramp.
Okay, so you guys have gone back through that individual decision makers cost trade-off, not just the cost of the city or what we're providing.
Right, the goal is not to just raise the cost of parking on the street. We're trying to optimize the utilization of the different facilities.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. I also want to follow up here a little bit. And again, I'm on a different track here. When I hear people talk about, since we have these free resources, why don't we subsidize other people's stuff and get, the free bus passes or this? I don't want to do that as a policy. I'm concerned that there's enough free stuff that we talk about giving out that we're going to get to the point with our transit or our parking that it's going to have to be levy funded instead of enterprise. And I want to protect that. And I want the staff to work on that and not just take suggestions from the council or from other people to say, since it's empty, give it to me. And I want us to fight to keep away from those kind of things. As far as, again, you're going back to the overall goal of this, there was support community downtown revitalization and, vitality. I think that's clear in this when I see stuff like that 40%. I know that's not dollarized. That's number of exits, number of entrances, whatever that way is. But how would you respond to the fact that I think that's a huge subsidy for downtown and we should carry it as a subsidy and account for it that way?
So, I mean, as I mentioned, other peers also have free,
Yeah.
time zones and time limits like that. I would say that as far as, historical, that's how it's been done. Changing it, we don't require to increase at this time. I think the recommendations that we have put in place will generate about 300 to 400,000 a year for us. And then if we needed to extend those time of or minimize the time of the free exits, we can take a look at it at that time. So if there's a need to do that, we would then take a look at it and say when should we do that?
Let me clarify and make sure I'm not misspeaking here. I'm not talking about trying to collect money on all those. I'm trying to say, we have the opportunity here that we're collecting, the revenue on our parking enterprise is at like $8 million. It has the chance to be at 12 million, and we're actually donating that to the downtown as a way of stimulating events and everything like that. And I'd like to see it accounted for that way, as opposed to just, we didn't collect it, so there's no accounting of it. There's no tracking of it. Because I think it's something that's important that this council does take credit for the fact that we are trying to create a downtown that has that sort of free and easy access. So I'll just, maybe there's a comment.
I was just going to say, I think that one of the critical items is the annual reporting and just making a real big deal about that, because it is a subsidy, and it means if you're giving up revenue in those areas, then you have to look for other areas for revenue. And that does represent a significant subsidy. So I think part of the recommendation is to have a consistent annual report that really calls that out for folks and makes that point. I think that's a really good point.
Good, thank
I
you.
may just also point out that there is also, the cost of doing business downtown. So trying to quantify some of that with more clarity about parking is one component. There's also a higher cost of ownership downtown and those types of things, but trying to tell the story of operating downtown and that this is one way that we do that. They also don't have the cost of maintaining a parking lot or the cost of
Right.
clearing snow, but So that doesn't necessarily resonate with a business owner if they see property values continuing to increase though, and their property tax changing in that way. So I just would clarify that it is for the owner of a business downtown, a little bit of a two-way street. And so while it is a subsidy, it also is a subsidy for doing business in an area that has other expenses that are different than if they were building outside of the core or if they were operating outside of the core.
Yeah, no, I'm going to push back because if I'm up sitting outside the core, I have my own parking lot and I'm paying for that.
Correct.
And I
but
have
the
my, and
cost
again,
per
I don't
square
have the
foot-
downtown problems, but that's the trade-off I make of doing business downtown.
I'm just extrapolating it out
All right.
to the larger cost of developing or doing business. The cost per square foot downtown is very different than the cost per square foot. That people make business choices all the time and
That's
they
right.
do that,
That's right.
but I just think it's important to note that there's a lot of other externalities also.
I have Southwest restaurants that would kill for the foot traffic they get downtown.
Oh, sure.
One of the things I wanted to mention on the earlier question, and I'm sorry, I didn't understand Councilmember Palmer's question earlier, but regarding the off-street and the on-street pricing. So we're trying to use the hourly rate to incentivize that turnover. And the concept is that your on-street spaces are your scarcest resource as a city, right? And it's truly what I think is in most high demand. So we want to price those according to market economics and price them higher than our off-street spaces. And as Sam said, incentivize folks that are staying for longer than an hour or two to really move into our off-street ramps.
Good, thank you. I also participated in some of these focus groups here, and I was with some business people and some other people, but I left with maybe I thought the marketing and the wayfinding was going to be a much bigger part of this recommendation, that it was this idea of like, we have confusion when people are coming in from the south. They don't see the parking ramp that makes the most sense for them. They see one parking ramp, but it's further away from this. Have we have any sort of strategy towards like getting better at that and maybe helping people get to the right place with either signage or marketing or somehow help improve those kind of address some of those problems?
Yep, so I'll just say real quickly, yes, we don't want to like undersell that. That is one of the things that we want to recommend, or that we're recommending, is to improve that wayfinding and signage. And so not just like different things like in the skyways, on foot, in the car. And of course, parking is just one piece of the puzzle for downtown. I mean, our wayfinding incorporates other things in the downtown area, so we can't just do it as a standalone, but we can start somewhere. And we do have some wayfinding, but it is confusing. But that's one of the things that we do have on.
Council President Carlson, if I might just jump in and just build off of what Ms. Zhang has said. It is, we are having that conversation, not only topics or project specific like wayfinding for BRT or wayfinding to get to the ramps, but thinking about it as a system. So it's really integrated and and there's confidence when you're looking at a wayfinding sign that, yep, this sign is going to get me to this place or this place. So we're very much having that conversation of what it means to navigate throughout the downtown, whether you're going to a surface lot, whether you're going to Link Rapid Transit, whether you're going to a parking ramp, whether you need to get to an institution. So it is part of we're going to have short-term, midterm, and long-term steps as we get on this journey of as Rochester's transforming with all the development that's happening in downtown particularly.
I would just say this is going to be front and center in the report. This is a huge recommendation. So the mayor alluded to some folks not knowing maybe what some of the resources are. We heard that in the surveys. Folks were not aware of the free 1 hour parking or the free nights and weekends. I think there are resources from an employee perspective about where folks could park maybe more economically than maybe they're aware of now. This is something we hear time and time again when we do these kinds of projects. We hear folks don't understand which facilities are even public facilities. Heard that in Rochester. Where do I go? What are the rules? Can I park here? I think the confusion around the different meter types kind of exacerbates the situation. I would point folks to cities like Omaha. They're doing a really good job. Just creating brand recognition and trust, I think, is what we're looking for. Obviously, Rochester Municipal Parking has a brand, but what we want to see is consistent kind of propagation of the brand throughout the entire ecosystem. So that's signage, that's wayfinding, but also digital, print, video, media. I mean, you look up parking videos, there's all sorts of kitschy videos out there kind of teaching folks how to use the technology and where to go. And they're kind of funny in a way, but they're really effective. Social media is a big part of it as well. just because people don't know, they don't know what the subsidy is,
Yep.
and they don't know the great work that folks are doing and the resources that we're providing. So that's going to be a huge part of it, as the administrator stated. So.
Good, good. So I guess, again, if I look here at the overall goals of like, what we're doing with the parking as far as, supporting that community and downtown growth, that sustainability and fiscally, again, in this, the marketing idea and this idea of communicating or connecting to the people using it, I'm really glad to see that the thinking isn't just from the city's perspective of saying like, we have this asset, how do we utilize it? It's from the person in the car or the employee trying to decide what I'm going to do next month, and making sure we're creating the right incentives that get them to the ramp versus to the street versus out every 3 hours to reload a meter. I hope we're thinking from that perspective, because I think we'll get better results going that way.
Yeah, one more thing to add is the city is moving forward with the process, as Ms. Strong mentioned, upgrading the parking access and revenue control equipment, so the gates and the garages, and that's going to provide a whole host of options, I think, for customers and the operator as well, in terms of pulling data to kind of understand how facilities are being utilized. I think there are some current limitations around how the garages can behave in a way because of some of the antiquated equipment. So that's going to be a big benefit to the city as well.
Good. And last comment I'll make, again, I did, it wasn't lost on me, the newer ramps, the medium age ramps and the older ramps. And I still think that's part of our problem in Minnesota is we didn't grow up with ramps. We don't use ramps. And what we see of ramps is dark, dingy movies and potentially dangerous places. And if we can do things to change that image, that would be wonderful. But I know we have some challenges there.
So I'd put in a plug for that. So part of what's being conceived in the it was the 12.1 million, I believe, that was stated for upcoming upgrades is aesthetic improvements. So things like lighting, painting, that does it goes a long way to improve the customer experience, to improve safety, the feeling like people understand how to navigate the facility and that it's a welcoming environment. I think that that's not insignificant at all. That's going to be a really critical part of how we think about moving forward in those facilities.
Good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick has a number of comments and questions.
Got it. My microphone is on. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate a data-rich study session where we can think up a bunch of questions for you all and kind of navigate through the process. So having all of this data is really wonderful. I also like numbers on slides, so kudos. That's awesome. So we're going to start with slide 9. Mr. Palmer asked about the 93,000 on the ramps, the difference. I recall a couple of years ago, perhaps it was that first year of the pandemic in 2021, when we offered the free parking, and I just kept pushing for it again a following year to just help the downtown businesses. And I can't remember, but I think I was quoted, well, it cost us $66,000. So there's a, almost $30,000 increase. Are the ramps just being used so much more now, or did I get that number wrong a couple of years ago?
You have a better memory than I do. I don't remember the number from the first time and how long we did it. I don't know if it was the last one that we just did for 2023 was 2 months. And I think the first one was less than that. I don't
Okay.
recall, but that could be a factor to that. Also, it was during the pandemic, and so there was like just different parking
Right,
patterns.
right,
at the time.
exactly. Okay, all right, thank you. On slide 9, wonder if I could read my writing here. I guess you answered that. Which ramp is used least? But I think you had, yeah, the pie chart slide. There was something that cued me on that. I don't recall what it is now. Thanks, we'll skip that one. So have discussions been had about removing all surface lot? And what might this take? In other words, we've got two ramps that are aging significantly. What if we went to new ramps instead and we could eliminate all of those surface lots, have temporary green space and or offer those up for housing? Have there any discussions been had about that?
That's a large question. As far as like surface lots go, I mean, they are in a variety of status. So we just talked about the Civic North lot. And then, of course, we've got the Zumbro lot and the South lot that is potentially, developed. Of course, Government Center lot is going to be where it is. It's just right out here. We're not going to get rid of that one. Armory lot, again, it's different power plant lot. So there's a different variety of what those lots are being used for and the development of it. I don't know if, Cindy, you have some.
Well, if I, thank you, Council Member Kirkpatrick, members of the council. So your question is, has there been some consideration of getting rid of all the surface lots and replacing strategically with a ramp or two? And so the short answer is no, we've not had that conversation of like, okay, all of these lots should go. We know we have lots identified that are likely redevelopment candidates. You're in negotiation, we're in negotiations right now for one of them. A structured parking facility as part of that private development to support that private development is part of the negotiation. I would just say that if that's it's important to understand, remember that graph of what we have to do to invest in our existing facilities, they exist, right? Whether we like it or not, they exist and they need maintenance. Just to help you understand the difference in the per stall cost of a surface lot as compared to a parking ramp, a per stall in a surface lot is generally 8 to 12,000, I think, and a ramp, depending on the site conditions, could be 40 to 60,000 a stall. So it's a really big difference when you're thinking about that kind of investment. And so, and then the next question is where to strategically locate it? What's the walk tolerance? Generally, we are a 2, no more than 2, maybe 3 block tolerance of what people are willing to walk. That was from a study a couple of years ago. But again, thinking about I really appreciate all the great conversation tonight. And just hope that you think and remember in the back of your mind, parking is part of an integrated system that is about mode shift. It's about transportation. It is about access. It's about enforcement. It's about technology. So there's a lot of things that come into play when if it seems like we're not able to completely answer a question because it doesn't live in a vacuum. It has all of these other considerations.
And the link BRT is something that is forthcoming that helps to determine some of those things and hopefully lessen that walk shed and change some of the people's, decisions about where they would be willing to park and then utilize a easy system that's available for more hours of the day, fare free and get on and off without.
And I appreciate all of those nuances within this system that we're talking about. So thank you for that. And I didn't know those figures. So again, more sound data. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And if I could just add one more thing, it's not too remote to think about what an autonomous vehicle society is going to look like and how that changes the nature of how downtowns 20 years from now think about their parking systems.
Right,
So when you're
exactly.
investing in a ramp, you're investing in something that's 40 or 50 years long, and the technology is coming at a more rapid pace. And so, being able to pivot to respond to technology is also a consideration.
Yep, I understand that. And if the private lot negotiations you were discussing was the Sherman Associates lot with the Civic Center North parking lot, yes, we do need housing far more than we need parking. However, that Civic Center North lot is the least expensive parking in our downtown area. And all of those part-time minimum wage or above minimum wage workers utilize that lot. So losing those, I don't know, 250 around parking spaces, shifting to less than 90 parking spaces for private residences that's a huge loss. And it's very convenient parking for those folks. So playing off of what Mr. Keene was saying about those workers downtown needing a place to park is really important. So I appreciate your considerations on that. Slide 20, please. Let's see here. Was there a breakdown of any participants that live downtown versus further out in the zip codes? Or was that not a survey question where you could break that down? In other words, the largest respondent pool was from 55901 at 33%. What portion of those 33% respondents, 256, lived closer to downtown versus lived out further, way out by Walmart or something?
I do not have that at my fingertips, but
You do have that?
I do not have it at my fingertips.
It was about 10%, but we didn't specifically look at their responses versus the others.
Oh, got it. Okay. I don't know if that would make a difference if you looked at it or not, but that was just a question that came up when you were on that slide. Okay, slide 22, please. You had mentioned, Ms. Zhang, that there was no tax levy for parking, or no. The levy does not include funding for parking.
Right, so the parking, our parking program is a enterprise fund where we
Right.
don't utilize any tax levy for our operating expenses.
Right, so what might it look like if the levy did include that? I'm not saying I'm a proponent for that at all. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm just wondering, have you shaken that out? Have you looked at that as, are you throwing all your marbles on the table to really assess and look at this? So just curious.
Yeah, so if there is an interest in that, I think there's, we can take a look at that, but if you go to slide, our fund balance is positive. So we're
Right.
utilizing that for our, am I going in the right direction? I am. So we are utilizing that for our capital expenses right now, and our, as mentioned before, our revenue and our expenses are positive, so we don't need to. But there may be a time when, if we don't do any changes to our recommendations to our chain or our rates, we will need to do something.
Mhm.
So if you see on this graph here, it's 2033 where we really start to dip.
Yeah.
Council President Carlson, if I maybe also jump in to the short answer is no, we have not looked at that. That would be a policy decision question. Typically, enterprise funds are a pay to play kind of situation. It's not uncommon. A lot of our comparable cities that we benchmark against are also enterprise funds pay to play. So that would have to come forward as a policy recommendation. And we would want to understand very specifically what the levy would be used for, as opposed to just generally saying we're subsidizing that X percent.
And I would just also add, we don't use it for operations, but there are a number of ramps that were built with development agreements that included tax increment financing, which means that but for the development, you wouldn't have had the tax rate, but instead of having it go into general operations, it's utilized as part of the financial mix to build
Right.
the parking ramps, which
Right.
is much more expensive than surface.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Slide 24, please. And I think Mayor Norton is gone, but she did ask about the EV chargers. Are the EV chargers at the most used ramps? Or do we have them maybe inefficiently placed for usage or the demographic that's using the ramps? If you're considering adding more, but it sounds like they're
I can
very
tell you I parked at
expensive.
First Street and plugged in, so thank you. It was very convenient. I think we have one at couple at ramp 6 as well. Is that correct? So yeah, I would say they're well placed.
Okay, all right, great. And then, should have been a physician.
She like squiggles line, squiggles line.
Yeah. How many something or other owners? Oh, yes. How many business owners? Yeah, biggie here. How many business owners have you talked to and consulted with downtown about these changes?
So we had 3 in-person roundtables. I think we had like around 20 or so attend. They were specifically folks that we reached out to through the downtown task force. We did have a conversation with, remind me the name, the woman who, Kathleen, shepherds the downtown task force. We got a report from her related to some sessions that the downtown task force had as well. So we incorporated that information. This was previous to our
Right,
rate
back
study.
last winter. Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
And a lot of it was about marketing and communications.
Okay, yeah.
And I believe we can get that information in terms of the survey, how many of those folks potentially were business owners.
Okay, that would be great too, because I think
Sure.
that definitely needs to be addressed to ask all of those business owners downtown. I know a fair amount of them are actually paying for parking for their employees, so that incentivizing, that subsidizing, you had talked about a parking card or something, Ms. Zhang, would be really great to consider, not just having one, but perhaps several, and I don't know what we could do about that, but
Yeah.
it's nice to see life coming back to downtown, and I want to really capitalize on
Right,
that.
and there are a lot of little niche things, like some of the on-street meters have grace periods.
Mm,
So you can
mhm.
hit a button and get a 10-minute grace period. A lot of folks aren't aware of that. That should be something we're marketing and letting folks know about. So if you're just popping in, you don't even have to plug the meter.
That's
grab
really
your
nice.
coffee or
That's
whatever.
wonderful. I did not know about that. Um,
It's the yellow ones.
the clue, big clue, yellow one, everybody who's listening, grace period on the yellow meters. Um, Thank you. I grew up in this city and for forever, I have always known that parking is free on weekends or an hour on ramps or after 5 PM. I don't even know for how long I've known that. It is mind boggling to me that when I meet somebody from out in the suburbs, they don't know where to park. They don't have anything about it. And I don't know if that's because I live so close to downtown or I've just kind of been in town like since forever. But it is really, really cool. And we need to push that. People come down from the cities and it's like, park for free. What? Really?
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for not changing that. It is a really huge asset. And I'm glad that when, I think I was pretty pushy in the fall about requesting those 2 months of free parking just before the holiday season started and then giving people time to be able to return those gifts that they didn't want up until the middle of January. That went through and it looks like it really helps. So I appreciate us all taking that expense on and using that to really support the parkers and bring some folks downtown.
That was really well said. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. So I usually wait to the end, as I've mentioned before, for many reasons, so that most of my questions can be answered. I know I can be a little bit narrative at times, but so a lot of the questions I had have been answered. I just have four, perhaps five questions, because most of them have been answered. But my one question is to kind of piggyback off of Councilmember Kirkpatrick's. We are always talking about revitalizing downtown, talk about the growth and everything. And when I did look at the 93,000 lost revenue from the city for the 2-hour free parking, I went to, I'm just kind of scrolling back here for a second, but I went to the public engagement, one of the meetings, and I saw that there wasn't a lot of actual business owners there. There was a lot of people from RDA. I saw several council members. So when you see numbers of people participating, the actual amount of business owners were very small. I was quite disappointed when I attended that meeting. But when you look at this, has there been any data on how much they benefited from those 2-hour free parking? Because if we have lost $93,000, has there been a measurement of how many sales were increased, how much real profit was brought into the city because of that? Because was it worth it to have that kind of a loss?
I'll go ahead and jump in if this is all right. To my knowledge, we've not measured that, but the city is, we have a technology software that we're looking at that we can establish parameters. So Parks Department has been working to acquire Placer AI, and it helps you understand foot traffic and what's happening at certain hours of the day. So the idea is that in the future, if we want to establish, if you want to do a holiday parking program next year, we can measure and identify where people came from, where they went to, and where they went afterwards. So we're getting, that's potentially a tool that we could use to measure the impact of a holiday free parking program, for example. So we don't measure it right now, but there is technology coming that we could potentially deploy for an incentive program measurement tool.
Okay. I just watched on 60 Minutes about the AI world, and there's face recognition stuff, and there's we're mapping.
This is not any of that. This is using
cell phone.
anonymous phone data that helps people how people are moving through your
Right.
downtown.
Yeah, there's just a lot of AI stuff that's coming up, mapping people's activities. So, but no, my other, on that, when we looked at the validations of program, you have you validate one of the slides, hotels and businesses. So I understand the reasoning. We want to prevent employee parking and things like that. So, but has that validation program been looked at for things that not necessarily are profit, but really essential? Like, I use a couple examples. I know my colleagues have used examples in their lived experience, but like I went to a free event, and it was a singing bowl chateau, and I'm like, oh, this is exciting. And I got a parking ticket because it wasn't, it was an hour event and you park for hour free, and then you're like, oh, your anxiety and you're supposed to be relaxing, and so you rush back and you get a ticket. So to have these free events are not really free if you have to pay for parking. So, so that's, have you been thinking about validation for kind of those community events? And then also the library, because the library, oh my goodness, I have 3 kids with special needs. You can't get in and out of the library in an hour. You just can't, unless you want to just like, oh, kids, don't look at books, don't be line, like you can't, I can't. So, and then accessibility issues and a lot of issues. So the library, to be truly free and accessible, that 1 hour is not enough. So has validation of those free programs also been looked at in addition to for-profit businesses and hotels?
So I heard a couple things in regards to like validation for events. I would say that most of the events are already during our free period, so evenings and weekends. And if there was an event that was during the day, usually there's an outreach to us if there's any kind of like uh, requirement or ask of what it is. So we do occasionally get requests on what, depending on what the event is and how big it is. So we do occasionally get that. In regards to the library, I do know, do we have something with at Civic Center for library?
So maybe I could just jump in. The library we just had the update about the RFP that's going out for library services and looking at holistically at ways that the library can be more accessible, how they can make sure that their programming is meeting current and future needs. So I would think that maybe a part of what the library would look at is whether or not parking is a constraint and whether or not that's something they would bring forward that might be a result from that, to determine whether, like, what types of programs could occur in order to have more accessibility for the library. But that's also part of why they've already implemented changes to their hours and made sure that they had more weekend and evening hours so that people can go during the times where the parking ramp is free. Even though it's technically free after 5. If you get there at 4:01, you do not pay a gate fee. Not that I want to give revenue away, but most people who know downtown know that if you get to a parking ramp at 4:01, you actually can get that hour for free and park for free until 2 o'clock in the morning. So the library's not open until 2 o'clock in the morning, so nobody try to go there. But so they have been responding to that in a couple of different ways, and it may be something that comes up as a result of that comprehensive review that the library is working on.
If I could also, so that's a perfect example of where the public transit system is a really great alternative. And so that's, again, part of how do we communicate out the variety of options that people have to access these great cultural assets in our community.
Yeah, well, thank you. I know that is a constraint. Parking is a constraint from people I've heard from to go down and utilize the library and events that are happening throughout the week where it's not on the weekends to go to these wonderful cultural events. Just they can't when they bring in kids and they just, the parking is a inhibitor. So I want a couple other questions here. The parking ramp, I see that you're talking about, safety and, I studies, I don't know exactly where I saw it on what slide. But has there been actual sensitivity awareness? I know it, like what Councilmember Keen had mentioned about the going into these parking ramps. There are a lot of people. I mean, I shouldn't say a lot, but people that I know personally, people that I have worked with in my past work, who have been traumatized by abuse, and there is assaults that happen in the parking ramps. That's a fact, and people are scared. And so, has that been, when you're looking at sensitivity, have you taken people who have been abused or attacked, or and have them walk into the parking ramp and give their lived experience on how to make it more safe, how to minimize the PTSD, how to, so that people can use those parking ramps that have that real issue. And it's a scary issue. I mean, I don't know if my colleagues, but I know I grew up, you put your keys between your fingers, and women were, I mean, I went in high school on how to walk to your car in the parking ramp, because just assume that you're going to get attacked, so it's a real issue for many women and for people, especially who have been experienced. So that's one question. And the other one is parking ramps are extremely difficult for people with disabilities. And it could be even cognitive disabilities where it's confusing, you're like, oh, I don't want to go down the wrong ramp, and it's really scary. It could be physical disabilities because they park really close. You're not going to get, I've I've been to ramps where I'm like, if I wasn't like an able-bodied person, I'm crawling in, I go through my passenger side, and I'm like, if I was elderly, if I had any mobility issues, there's no way I could park in some of these ramp spaces because of the way people park or the how close the lots, the sizes are. So those two are real life experiences. People who, there is a safety issue, not just perceived, but actual safety issue. And there is a issue with mobility for people who are just confused because of all the, difference in environment, they driving at night or whatnot. But then also literally accessibility. So if we're going to take away spots that are on the surface, I sure hope both of those are met to the extent where people can walk in there fully aware, like saying there's security cameras, I'm not going to get mugged because every single place of this place is monitored, and that if I have a disability and I'm coming up in a walker, I can get into my vehicle safely. Has that been a sensitivity kind of people who have experienced lived those, been involved in planning these abilities for this to be an actuality for everyone?
Council President Carlson, may I just jump in first and then defer to Ms. Zhang to answer? I just appreciate the questions. I do want to clarify, particularly for those who might be watching now or watching at a replay, we have thousands of people that park every single day very safely. We have a very safe parking system. You as a council have invested in a number of things and are continuing that investment in terms of security, enforcement, cleanliness, all of which we can see, as you heard earlier today in the survey results, have shown an improvement in people's perception of what it is to experience parking in the city of Rochester. So I do, for those listening now or later, want to make it very, very clear and not to diminish, people's personal experiences. But we have thousands of people that park every single day, every single month, very safely in the city of Rochester. If you want to defer to the other questions.
Okay. And I appreciate you trying to ease fear, but attacks do happen. And when I was a few years ago, when I first moved here, someone actually was, helped me, someone who was working there, make sure that I got there safely because he worked in the ramp and talked about the assaults that happened in one of these ramps. So I know it happens. So I'm just not, I'm saying
The
it,
police data that we could always pull and show how safe the ramps are, but
but
maybe
it
Ms.
happens.
Zhang
It is
could
a
talk
reality.
about how they work to make sure that the ramps are accessible. I think that was covered in some of the presentation, but I think it would be helpful for folks to know how accessible our ramps are and it's a good question. And so I think it'd be
Yeah,
great if we could
those are
allow
good
her to
points with
answer.
ADA and safety. As far as ADA goes, it's not on here, but it's kind of like one of the slides. But that is one of the focus to make sure that it's accessible to all. That's one of the goals is that it's available to all. And so accessibility is one of them, whether it's like ADA ramps or the push buttons for doors to open. Those are some of the things that we want to make sure that it's continuously working and that it's accessible. As far as safety goes, we do have security cameras throughout the ramp. We have a security, as I mentioned earlier, contract that will be monitoring the ramps overnight for 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we do have that contract going on, and I think that's a huge improvement for our ramps.
Okay, thank you. And then I know for time wise, I just will have one more question. Thank you. I like to have things on record so people can go back and, kind of see things. But so today is tax day. And it's the first day that the Civic Center is going completely cashless. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that. I looked on the website. And so they are not accepting cash. And I personally have huge issues with that, a basic equity, seniors.
Not
youth.
really related to this.
It is related because I'm asking about parking because some cities and they're going toward being cashless. You have to have your card to get out. I know my 15-year-old who's just starting driving doesn't have a credit card, right? She's going to pay with cash if she parks in the parking ramp. So it is relevant because that's a civic center. I think that needs to be an issue about how we should not be cashless for that facility. But to focus on the parking, is that something that is being looked at going in that route? Because I feel that would be a very bad route to go in with a whole, I believe punishes people in poverty. It punishes people who don't have access to credit. It punishes domestic violence, people who don't want to be tracked by, with different worlds. So I'm just saying, is that something in the future, as other cities I have seen have gone to their parking ramps, not having the ability to have cash back?
Right, so I can say
Thank you.
that currently technology wise, we don't have that ability, and that's one of the things that we're looking at with the technologies, that potential. So if you recall, the smart meters have three ways you can pay. You can pay on the app, cash, and credit card. And so we'll have that options out there. I mean, we're not recommending anything at this point, but we are looking at that technology, and of course, technology brings options out there. So that's
Is that something being looked at in the future, to have ramps that cannot be utilized without physical currency, cash?
Well, I would say not at this time, and we don't have that. But
Okay.
if it was, that would be something that we would have to bring forward to the council for that,
And I would
review.
just maybe clarify that while the Civic Center and many civic centers and many parking ramp programs do go cashless, there's a lot of ways to address folks that maybe still need to be able to pay in cash and get some sort of a card or something like that. So that is already going to be in place at the Civic Center. And I would imagine that if, as the team, we're going to consider going completely cashless, that they would be looking at opportunities for people to be able to bring in some funding and be able to pay with with cash and be able to get a card and then utilize that at the ramp. So that's what most facilities do that go cashless. They provide a workaround for people that need to still be able to pay in cash.
Okay, so that's going to be at the Civic Center as well? So if like a child comes with a $20 bill to pay for,
They will have a
snacks, they will
workaround, but
have
it
a-
is recommended and most folks are able to connect, like they'll also be able to pay with their phone. So if people have something connected. So there's a lot of different ways that that can be addressed. And we still obviously don't encourage that because it increases the total cost of operation, which as this council has talked about, we want to make sure that we are optimizing funds and reducing the cost of government everywhere that we can so that it reduces the tax burden for people that live here.
just to clarify, so right now, today, when it starts, this program at the Civic Center, so
Madam
a
President.
child can pay with
Madam
cash?
Madam
It's not
President.
about parking.
Well,
It's just
I know, but
providing
I
a
just want to,
corollary.
okay.
Yeah, and
It's very well, I think it should be brought up, and I just, for the record, I think that we need to,
they've moved away from it.
okay. It's an equity issue, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, thank you so much. And so this will come forward as a report and recommendation or session?
Right, we will have the study, parking rate study, and we will bring it forward to the council for a report and recommendation, yes.
Okay, by the end of the year, did you say?
Oh, no, sooner than that.
Okay.
I forget the timeline, but it will be sooner than that, in a couple months, I would say. So we just need to wrap it up. We appreciate all what we heard today, the questions, dialogue here, and we will certainly take that and make sure that we address it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much to the whole team. All right, Ms. Elms, study session schedule.
Sure, your next study session is on April 29th. So we'll be discussing Link Rapid Transit and the West Transit Village and having an update on that. So kind of integrated with what was talked about today. We also are going to be having a refresher on land use, zoning, and planning and how that all of those things go together, especially with the new UDC code for the city council. So that will be on that meeting. And then we have an economic update coming from Destination Medical Center to provide some status on a few things and where that's going. And then just because it was mentioned earlier, we on the 13th of May actually have a study session topic that's about air service development. We have an update from the JEDI audits that are related to DEI that is going to come forward for library, parks, and HR. And then we will have that closed session discuss labor negotiations. So, and only one study session in May based on how the holidays fall.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening.